And my understanding is that there was, it's now being recorded, that there was some question whether we approved the minutes from yesterday, but we'll get to that in a second. Mike, do you want to report on the question raised by Mr. Brucker concerning voting?
Yes, I looked into that matter yesterday afternoon, right after the meeting. Under Title II in the laws concerning quasi-judicial boards, the presiding officer is allowed to vote, provide motions, and give seconds to motions. But then I further checked our board policies and procedures that the board adopted, the last version of that, to be sure there wasn't anything within our policies and procedures that limited the ability of the chair to vote or participate in those actions there, or any parliamentary method that we've adopted that would require that, and there is none. So that means the board chair can vote, make motions, make seconds, and so therefore what that means for yesterday is that all the actions we took yesterday will stand unless someone who voted on the prevailing side wanted to reconsider any of those actions. And where that leads us in the agenda, just so you know, we had gotten to the veterinary diagnostic lab, EPP. We had approved items or priorities 1, 2, and 5, and we're discussing priority 3 at the time. So 3, 4, 6, and 7 in the MDOL still need action. And then from there, the Central Services and Brands, EPP, and the legislation. So that's where we left off. Everything we did before that is done unless somebody wants to reconsider.
Okay, and someone raised the issue relative to whether I usually separate the minutes from the consent agenda. I don't know whether I did that yesterday or not.
That is correct. We did not take separate action on the minutes. However, I believe you took a motion to approve the consent agenda, which would approve all the documents that hadn't been pulled from that. But in past meetings, the board has done an approval on the minutes separately. So technically, we're good. But if the board wishes to take separate action on the minutes, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Okay. Does anybody want to take separate action on the minutes? If not, they'll stand under the consent approval. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on then to the, let's see, I think it was under priority 3, was it?
Yes, sir. Priority 3 is the one where we were starting to discuss, and that's where we stopped taking action.
Okay, and that's under the green document, or the green?
Correct.
Green background. Is everybody there on that one? It's entitled Lab Equipment, 2 Applied Biosystems, Quant Studio 5 Real-Time PCR System. Go ahead, Dr. Judah, if you want to explain. Again, for a refresher.
Yeah, so the 2 ABI 7500 thermocyclers we have are USDA owned. They were purchased through a NOM grant some number of years ago, getting a little bit older now at this time. They're still supported, but what we'd like is to put in a request for some new equipment that would provide some redundancy and additional throughput, so that would boost our standing with the NOM lab, in that we would have the capacity to perform more PCR test reactions in a 24-hour period in the event of an animal disease outbreak, such as African swine fever. And this would also give us some equipment that we own ourselves rather than it being federally owned. So we're asking for one-time only funds for 21 and 22 in the amount of $32,000 each year.
Do you need $32,000 each year, or does a half a loaf work?
A half a loaf would work.
Okay, is there any motion from the board concerning that item? If not, I'll move on.
I'll move that we accept that.
Brett moves that we accept both years, 32,000 on the item number 3. Is there a second?
Second, this is Sue.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Is there further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. Dr. Judah said he could go with 1 at this time rather than 2. And I would be very supportive of 1. I don't know that I would support 2 at this time, considering all the financial stuff we looked at yesterday.
Okay, any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know why I'm not used to not having myself seen so I can wave my hand at you or something, but I guess I'm a little hesitant. Not that I don't think we probably need new equipment, but I've just, in my mind, have decided we're gonna have to somewhere come up with enough money to build this lab. And so to me, I guess if we need 1, that would be different, but every time we need something that we could maybe get by with for a while, and I'm not usually quite that bad, but I would think that we could try to cut some places. We haven't got to the per capita stuff yet, so I guess maybe that's my hesitancy to get into some of this stuff that maybe we could do without till the next session.
John, I'll adjust my motion to approve 1 of the PCR systems.
Okay, are you with, Sue, are you okay with that as a second?
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, I'll take as a substitute motion then the motion to approve 1 of the lab equipment pieces in the amount of $32,000 in our request. Is there discussion on that motion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
All right.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's approved. Mike, for the benefit of those who may be on the phone and for some of us, would you go through the process real quickly on these requests relative to their submission and the date upon, or the normal date or expected time frame in which, if you change your mind, you can change your mind?
Yes, sir. So we're right now at the deadline this month, or coming up at the end of this month, to submit these requests to the Office of Budget and Program Planning, OBPP, and the Governor's Office. They're pulling all this together to put together the governor's budget to meet their deadline for submission to the legislature. I believe they have a deadline in, well, the final deadline for the governor's budget is December 15th. So, you know, if an agency had an item that it wanted to pull, we would have all the way up until December to communicate to the governor's office that we no longer wanted to pursue that and wanted to pull that from the budget he's going to transfer to the legislature.
Okay, so I wanted, before open for questions, I wanted to get that out because September is the time frame for per capita funding discussion, and usually October and November there's shuffling. So any questions of Mike on that?
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, item number 4.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Greg Judah, Director, MDDL. This is a request for an auto stainer for the histology lab. So this would be performing our H&E staining on a daily basis, which we do a pretty large volume of. And right now it's a manual process that our technician is performing. We occasionally have to swing other technicians into the histology section in order to meet the demands when it's a high volume day. So this would allow for smoother operations, more efficient operations within that section. And then also just wanted to bring attention to the fact that there will be some additional work demands on that section once we bring in that immunohistochemical chronic wasting disease testing this fall. So this is a one-time only request that we would like to place to get us an auto stainer.
Okay, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina, and I move that we submit this for, I move that we accept this.
Is there a second?
This is Ed. I'm finally on.
Welcome, Ed.
I'll second it.
Is there further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? I'm an aye at this time because of the CWD implications. Okay, number 6.
So number 6 is automatic dishwasher and water bath for the media prep lab section. This is the area where we make a lot of the reagents and medias for the different lab sections. We go through a lot of glassware, and that's currently all washed by hand by a lab technician. And we would like to provide some automation to that function. And so that's the request. And then the water bath is just a replacement of an aging unit that's going to need to be replaced at some point.
Before we get into motions, let me ask you a question. Based upon our current budget projections for the end of the year, what's your budget look like?
Brian, you may want to speak to this because you've got the most current data, but I think our reviews haven't revealed any red flags. It looks pretty good. In fact, if anything, we're a little, we're in the red operationally, but we're more than making up for that on the personnel side this year.
So how will you finish on current projections?
Should be right on budget.
How close?
If anything, we'll be in the black for the year is what it looks like right now.
That's what I thought. So rather than having a whole laundry list of small items, I'm thinking that one option may be to authorize you for these 2 activities out of this year's budget.
That's certainly a possibility. And, I'm relying on Brian for guidance as we get to the end of the year to see whether or not that's a possibility, and I'll work with him.
Brian?
Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, Mrs. Scully, this is Brian.
Oh, sorry. Brian, I was going to say that from my standpoint, I certainly support that methodology for smaller items. If the $102,000 positive that we're showing for the lab right now continues to hold, and actually we're at the end of the fiscal year, so it should hold pretty good. And I think that is a better course of action than having small items go to the legislature.
Board, any comments, motions, questions?
No, this is Lila. That would make sense to me. As opposed to either that or have a lab thing come through where you have 10,000 to get what's necessary when it comes up or something. I don't know how you do it, but rather than each individual item.
Well, what I was suggesting is a possibility of us approving the acquisition of those 6 and 7 items out of this year's budget.
Yes.
That would be fine with me, but do we need a motion? Is that what you want now?
Yeah, I think that's what we should do. Because
Then
that way if something happens to the negative and they need it, then we can look to another solution. And if it's needed now, and they have the funds now, and it's available in per capita funding, then we ought to spend it for that purpose as opposed to going through the legislature. So I'm assuming you need it now, Doc.
Yes, that would be preferred, at least within the foreseeable future.
Is there motion one way or another to do any,
Yeah,
all, or none?
This is Lyle. I would make a motion that if our balance is in the black and we have the money to do it, that we approve number 6, correct? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
number 6 and 7,
Yeah.
15,000.
Right, that we approve those 2 items, whichever one, if we don't have quite enough to get the ones they need the most.
This is Nina, and I second it.
Is there any further discussion or concern from the board? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay.
John, did we skip number 4 or did I miss something?
No, I thought we did number 4 already.
It passed.
Okay.
Yes,
Pat?
number 4 was approved yesterday.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
What's that?
Wasn't it just approved now or
I think
not?
we just approved it today.
Right.
And I voted
Excuse
no.
me,
I
I'm
was
sorry,
the
Mr.
only-
Chair, I was confused. We did it just a few minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah, and I was the
must
only
have been
negative.
asleep.
What?
I must have been asleep then. Go on, I just was curious.
Yep. And I voted no. It was the only no vote. You were counted as an aye.
I
So-
voted no also.
Okay, so 2 no's. But it passed. Okay. Next page. The first one on the page is full-time attorney.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Mike. I don't know a lot of explanation about what that is. It's something that's come before the board the last 2 times we've done EPP, and I guess the question for the board is whether you feel that is something that now at this time you'd want to move forward with, and whether you feel budget would support such action. And I'll just leave it there.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yesterday it was asked that how much money we were spending on legal fees. Has anybody come up with a number?
I'm going to defer to, I think I'd asked if Brian or Evan would do that research, and I don't know if one of them did that after we got off the meeting yesterday.
But in fairness to those doing the research, they'd have to split the apple up, because you've got,
Right.
if you had it's not apples to apples. In other words, if you had a full-time attorney, they wouldn't be doing all the work of the cases we've had in the most recent past. You'd still have to pay others to do it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, to support that statement, that is right. It's not like you would get rid of an agency legal services bill. They would still handle litigation, because what happens there is your in-house counsel who is advising staff most likely is going to be a witness if we're in litigation. So they can't litigate a case for which they would be a witness and did the consultation on. So the only thing we would be saving is the times where we run up against a question about not understanding how a statute or rule should be applied, and we have to reach out, for a legal opinion on that. So that's what we would save. So that's certainly not all of the bill. It may be half to 60% of the bill, but as Mr. Scully pointed out, probably half the bill is litigation, which we would still have to work with agency legal services to provide that.
Mr. Chairman,
John, a question, please.
Sure, Brett, go ahead.
I'll rephrase the question then from yesterday. So what's estimated here is $100,000 a year. I'm assuming that that's benefits included or not? That's one question. The second question is, what? Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, the $100,000
Mike.
is inclusive of benefits.
Okay, so then $100,000 a year. I think, unless I'm confused, I thought somebody said yesterday we were paying $106 an hour for the work that this person would do currently. So if you take 100,000 divided by $106 an hour, that's about 950 hours. Do we have 950 hours worth of this type of work to justify that 100,000? Or what? Or are we spending extra money?
Mr. Chair, Mr. DeBrucker, again, they do give us that in time. So I'm going to ask, and I know that Evan and accounting process those bills. If they can in the background, if you want that information, total up the hours spent by our attorney, and obviously a detailed look at it, we would be able to break down what was something that an in-house counsel could do versus something ALS would have to do, and give you that breakdown.
Well, without objection, I'm going to just move past that one for the moment because we don't
There's
have
no
that.
objection from me.
Okay. Because we don't have that data, and when we get it, we'll deal with it. Public Information Officer.
Yes, the Public Information Officer, obviously a position that the department once had, hasn't had for about a decade. Last session, we went after $50,000 in our budgetary request to do contract work. That was, or to be able to contract with either with another agency or someone third party to provide some of those services for us. That did not make it through the budget last time. This time, the proposal again is where we started with this last session, which is a full-time public information officer. So the $80,000 amount that you see there is inclusive of salary and benefits. Currently, how we do public information in the department is we have been working with the Department of Agriculture. Kindly, they have not charged us any fees. Of course, we try to be very careful with how much we ask them to do, but, you know, press releases on brucellosis and those types of things are what we're asking them to do. Obviously, a public information officer for a state agency would be the main point of contact for press inquiries into the department and be able to get those to the right person to answer those questions or decide that we can't. Sometimes I do know we have difficulty getting back to the press in a timely manner, and that's partially because our folks who are getting those inquiries are doing other jobs, and that's ancillary or secondary to what they do. And so that's some of the issues that we have without having a public information officer, but I just wanted to be fair in pointing out it is something we tried to get some funding for last session, and we were not successful during that session in getting that funding.
Any,
Mr.
go ahead.
Chairman, this is Ina. Okay, and listening to Mike talk about this, it sounds more like the public information officer would be dealing with the press. And yesterday we had a discussion about getting in touch with industry to see what kind of support they had for the vet lab. We've had issues about livestock owners who have no clue that there is such a thing as per capita tax. We have a lot of other issues like that. So would a public information officer deal with those issues as well, or are they only going to deal with the press?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Bacchus, that you're correct that they would deal with all of these other issues as well. I think they would be helpful in us being more proactive in communications to the industry and to stakeholders, and not just taking the press calls, but also putting together documents and information to share with all stakeholders, not just press, but with the industry organizations, with producers themselves. We recently went through, as you know, sending out this per capita fee letter and doing that project. A public information officer would have played a role in that. It would have allowed Evan and budgetary staff and folks like Brands who were providing the documentation for that to concentrate on their parts, and the public information officer could have concentrated on the letter and some of those and how that information was going to get out to stakeholders. So yes, the position would do more than just deal with the press. I think it could do whatever the board and myself thought we needed to do to be more proactive about departmental communications.
So would the public information officer work only from within an office here, or would they actually go out and mingle with industry and the public?
Ms. Bacchus, my expectation for this role would be that it would be forward-facing and be out there. So we've had requests in the past, from our stakeholders for their summer meetings, their winter meetings, to have a public presence there, to have a booth, to have someone there able to talk to people and provide information. This person should do that. And I know some of the history of this position when it did exist in the department, and I think I know a little bit about why it doesn't exist anymore. I would say that the expectation would be not only that presence would be there, but so that person would be there and available to people during those times. So yes, I do believe they would have a forward-facing component to their job, being out at meetings, along with other technical staff who are there to provide details on, various programs and issues of a technical nature that the department is presenting on.
Comments from the board? The only thing I know is that we couldn't make enough work to keep the last one busy.
Right.
And when it came time to show up for boot, what?
I apologize, John. Go ahead. I apologize.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Jump in.
I was just curious why we upped the cost request from 50 to 80,000.
Well, I'm assuming
Mr.
they're
Chair.
asking for full FTE versus a contract.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So last time when we considered this, there was a request for a full FTE and said, well, let's see if we can spend some money to contract to others because we need probably a half-time PR person, and we didn't get it. So it's a repeat deal.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
you discussed a half-time FTE last time. Is this a discussion about a half-time or a full-time FTE?
I misspoke. There was a request for a full-time FTE. Instead of a full-time FTE, we asked for the approval to contract and share somebody else's for $50,000 total, not a half to FTE, and that was denied. So when we went through this same process 2 years ago, maybe 2 years in a row, I don't know. It was a full-time FTE, and we substituted last time 2 years ago and said, how about getting, because we don't have enough work, how about getting authority to spend money on a contracted relationship? And it was denied at the sum of $50,000. But this is an FTE as opposed to contract.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. I'm really hesitant about this position because to me, it has to be really the right person. And a lot of the problems sometimes is when you get somebody, I would even mind trying to contract because at least you can get rid of the person if it's not working. You get FTE, I don't know how they got, what happened to the last one, but it has to be a pretty specific, special person that can do this job and do it well. That's my only hesitation. I probably won't vote for it just because I'm more focused in on actually the where the money's going to come from for all this stuff. And to me, if it got denied last time, maybe, I don't know. I just know when stuff got rerun when I was there, it was like, and it all depends who's in the legislature. Why are you trying this again? So, but anyway, that's only my viewpoint. So.
Okay, further discussion. Is there a motion in one way or another, or do you want to move on? I'll ask for a motion. Okay, hearing none, I'll move on. A helicopter for $1 million. It's the same as it was last meeting, and we referred in going through this to the letter that was requested by the board, and the last paragraph from John Stiver recommends two things: that we send a letter putting ourselves in the mix for the availability of a replacement through the Army Aviation Program Executive Office, and that we look towards the spending of approximately $290,000 to replace the 6962C in the fall of 2021. And there you have it.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Mike, and then I'll refer to Brian, but a couple of things about the request. I think Brian's first number here, the cost estimate of $1 million, is coming from conversations that we had maybe going 2 or 3 meetings ago about what the price would be for purchasing a new asset, a new helicopter. As you're correct, and it's in your packet, that we received the recommendation from Mr. Stiver with regard to some helicopters that the U.S. Army currently has that they're decommissioning. So I would put out there that one thought for consideration is that we know about what those are going to cost, which is much cheaper, about 1/3 of the cost of what's here for a new asset. And it seems like from his recommendation that we could potentially put in a letter of intent, but that does not bind us to buy one. We can refuse. If one came available tomorrow, we could say we're not ready yet. I believe that's the way that process works. And then if this were approved by the legislature, we would have our letter of intent in, and when one came available, we would have the authority to execute on that. Obviously, if the legislature did not approve that budgetary authority for a helicopter, then we could withdraw our letter of intent because we would know we wouldn't have the budgetary authority to move forward with replacement. But tactically and strategically, I think those are some options that the board has with this particular item, unless Brian views it differently.
Chair Scully, this is Brian. The only thing I would add to that is that at the end of our conversations yesterday, I wrote down that, and you suggested that we split this request into $150,000 in 2022 and 2023, and I supported that. So I think that is where we're at as far as a proposal.
So the proposal's been changed from $1 million proposal to 150,000 in 2022 and 150,000 in 2023. Is that what I just heard? Or what did I confuse there?
Yeah.
No, you're pretty close.
Mr. DeBrucker, that is what was at the end of the conversation. That was the conversation yesterday ended with that. You are correct.
Okay.
Let me give you the reason why I suggested doing that. First of all, because we don't have a capital replacement program across the board, and we know we've got some issues coming up for the helicopter, it seemed prudent to be able to put some kind of stakeholder in place to notify the legislature and the industry that we'll have to do some replacement. And no magic to that number, but it ought to be at least somewhat substantial to be able to do something. But if you read the last 3 paragraphs of the recommendation from John Stiver, the staff, I suspect, if they're like me, is somewhat confused about what the real recommendation is. Because he says, because of the difficulty in getting parts, the very inflated cost of the parts, and the aging airframe for a 6962C, I told BOL about the availability of a civilian Bell 206 available through Army Aviation for 180, noting that it will require 40 to 90,000 modification. So puts us in a 220 to 270,000. Then the next paragraph says, although 1095T has more total airframe hours than 6962C, parts for it are still more readily available since it is a civilian helicopter. It works best in mountain terrain of western Montana, and BOL should replace it with a similar helicopter that will, unfortunately, cost much more than replacing 6962C, but it doesn't say how much. Then it says that his recommendation is to look at the availability of funding up to $290,000 to replace the 6962C fall of 2021 and send the letter in, not 1095T. So he's saying parts are more available for 1095T, but that's the one you really ought to replace more because it goes in the mountains. But instead of doing that, because it's much more expensive, you ought to replace 6962C because of parts. So I think it's prudent that we do something in that process. That's why I came up with that idea. So whatever.
Well, John, I appreciate you pointing that stuff out. Those are some of the same comments I was going to make. There's plenty more. I'm still baffled at, what is the real airframe lifetime for these helicopters? I don't think anybody's stated or come with any kind of proof what that timeline is. And I think that's what we asked for a meeting or two ago, wasn't it?
Well, I think it is, Brett. And if you go to the middle of the page in the report, it says the reason why there are fewer hours on the 6962C, even though it's a 69 model, it's a result of the hours they're putting on the aircraft. So there's fewer hours on it than the other. I just think that it's probably prudent for us to do something as a placeholder, even though we don't know exactly what to do. There's something that's going to have to be done. We just don't know what. And if we send a letter,
I don't disagree with that.
It's just not knowing what to do for sure. No, you're on. I agree.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you whatsoever. I was going to have a pretty hard time supporting $1 million outlay for this without a lot more information. But your suggestion, or whoever's suggestion it was, of 150,000 each year as we try to get to the bottom of what the actual facts of these two different airframes are on these helicopters, sounds like a good idea to me. Because if you read through that, the one with more hours is getting the engine replaced. And near as I can tell, that engine's got another 7 or 8 years in it. So if that means the airframe's good, I don't know. I just don't understand the whole request.
So, Mike, what if we write the letter for consideration, which, as I understand it, the same as you, that we can withdraw it, And we put a placeholder here for helicopter replacement without naming the helicopter, and put a stakeholder amount of money in so that there's awareness in the legislative arena and you have time to get to more bottom of it. And who knows, something may take place that would make a decision going forward. Or
Yeah,
do you want
Mr.
to
Chair,
leave?
I see no problems with that methodology. I think that is probably the one that gives us the most flexibility in what opportunities present themselves. And I think it also gives us an opportunity to put something in front of the legislature to take their temperature on it. And if it's rejected, then we would obviously know, we would have a much better understanding of the future and what we need to do there if the legislature is not willing to even approve some budgetary authority towards working on a solution.
The rest of the board, comments, motions?
John, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Lila. I think that's a good way to do it. I do think you need to be a little bit specific when you ask for the request, and at least tell them what we're looking at, and we're not sure which one might die first, or however you want to say it, because they do not like requests with, well, we think we're going to need 150,000 a year, but we're not sure which one. I mean, we have to be a little bit careful how we word it, so they don't think we're just wanting 150,000 a year.
Well,
The banker loves it
recommendation-
when I do that, Lila.
What's that?
I said, my banker loves it when I make a request like that.
All of them do.
Well, we
I
can
have
go.
one other point I wanted to make, John, to go
Go ahead.
on, but I just want, before you
No.
go past it.
Go ahead.
So the 6962 that John is Stiver's suggesting gets replaced first in his letter. At the outset, it says that it's on loan from the National Defense Authorization, or from somebody, from the Law Enforcement Support Office, pardon me. So what happens if we replace that? Do they take it back and then we just give it back to them, or have they loaned it to us with the idea that we own it now? And then are we going to sell that helicopter? What happens to that helicopter at the end of this, if that gets replaced?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Brucker, this is Mike. So yeah, we work with the LESO program, the law enforcement support. Can't remember what all those letters stand for. That asset gets audited every year, and we go through a process for that to make sure that we still have it in our possession and that it's still in working order, so on and so forth. So yes, that would be turned back into that program and surplus by that program. So there wouldn't be a return value that would be coming to the department. The value that the department received was that was decommissioned Department of Defense assets that we received at a very cheap rate, and they make those types of assets available to the law enforcement community. And that allows them to be able to get that equipment. But you're right that it's not ours to necessarily surplus, sell, and sort of have offsetting value. We would report when we were ready to be done with that. We would report to the LESO program, which is run by the Highway Patrol here in the state of Montana. Is the office that's responsible for it. We would inform them that we were done with the asset, and then they would take it, surplus it, decommission it, do with it whatever they wanted to do, and the value of that would go back to that program, not the Department of Livestock.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, we probably should move on. So
One other question I have is,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I just, probably this has been checked before, but is there no way to get another loaner helicopter from LESO? An updated one, newer one?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. DeBrucker, as I've worked with that program in the last few years, it does state that the asset is supposed to be used in your arrest and apprehension authority for law enforcement. And so therefore, the methodology or the program that Mr. Stiber has suggested of there being some surplus helicopters to be able to access is a better methodology than using LESO. It's not that we can't try to use LESO again, but we would have to explain how the asset was going to be used in our arrest and apprehension authority for our law enforcement officers. And I believe the department made that argument evidently very well when we received it the first time. And we do use it occasionally for law enforcement purposes, but I think the methodology Mr. Stiber suggested is a better way to go than LESO, less complicated, less restrictions.
This
Okay,
is
what are
Sue.
Go ahead.
This is Sue, Mr. Chairman. And I just move that we approve the $150,000 for 2021 and 2022 and send the letter in to get authority for the legislature.
Is there a second? It should be 2022 and 2023.
Okay.
Is there a second?
Second. Lila, second.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just clarification for myself on Sue's motion. The letter goes to the Army as opposed to the legislature, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
This request goes to the legislature and the letter goes to the Army Aviation Program Executive Office.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Okay.
I'm going to oppose that, John.
Pardon me?
I'm going to oppose it just because I think we need more questions answered, but I'm not against this. So I'm not against this. I just want more information before we go too much further.
Any other opposition that I didn't hear? So Brett's a no. Okay, next one. Computer funding, Brands Division. Hello?
This is Sue. I move that we approve this computer funding.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Ted?
I had asked yesterday that I thought we had a schedule for replacement. Did we get the information on that?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Dan Olson, IT. I can kind of give you a little background. So, since I've been here, every year the $30,000 mark is what we've had annually for our 5-year replacement schedule. However, it looked like right before I started, there was a one-time only purchase for 19 laptops for brands. 13 of those went to the markets for doing their market sales, possibly remote ones, and then the rest were to the brands investigators. That gave us a spike that almost doubled our PC costs coming up in fiscal year 22. So the plan that I worked out was to stretch those out so we don't have that spike of doubling it every 5 years in that year. So what that ended up with is an increase of roughly about $8,000 per year, which would give us $2,000 for incidents, say, that were out of our control of complete PC failures for replacement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. My only question is if we're already have 30,000 there, and brands, I don't know what the final status of their budget will be, but if there were possibility of using, if there's something left to try to buy some of those out of the budget from this year, much as lab equipment.
Well, last I looked, brands wasn't looking so great. Unless that's
Mr. Chair?
changed with the vacancy savings. Go ahead.
So the point I was going to make to Ms. Taylor's point is that's what we did last time, which is what's caused the spike, because you have a number of assets that are firing at the same time. So that is, I think, what Mr. Olson is attempting to do here is to even that out so that he has an amount budgetarily to keep everything on a 5-year rolling cycle for replacement. And if we were to go out and buy those 19 laptops again, and I guess we could say that maybe that won't be our problem, who knows, but 5 years from now, you would run into the same problem where you would have a large number of laptops in one budget year that would be hitting their phased replacement as opposed to evening that out where it's about the same number each year.
And you have to remember part of the reason for the spike was we had new software activity that could not be handled by the previous computers. And it was being downloaded across the entire organization. So there was a need for those computers in order to handle that software change. Further questions? The motion on the floor is to approve it. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed?
No,
Is that Lila? I mean,
Yep.
Nina? Who is it?
Lila.
Lila's a no. Okay, and I've got the next two are skipped. And next one is the 2 full-time temporary, not so permanent decennial brands re-record that fit in with one we currently have. Do we need to have a explanation of the timing and the issue here? Probably better.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, this is Mike. So yes, we've been bringing on temporary positions during this biennium to start stepping into re-record. We will hit the beginning of re-record in January. And so what will happen is that in June of that year, we'll switch over bienniums, and those one-time only temporaries will not carry forward with us like a regular FTE would. So those FTEs will disappear if we don't take action to reestablish them as one-time only. So, and so what we have to do is establish those to get us through that last 6 months of re-record and into the cleanup period in the few months, roughly 3 months after re-record. And then, of course, those temporary positions would go away, and we wouldn't need to do this again until we got to re-record at the end of the next decade.
Okay, so are there any other questions?
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, Lila, I
Go ahead.
understand what you want. My question is there going to ever be any efficiencies so you don't need that? And I guess that's, if we put it in and we need to take it out or think we can take it out, can we always take it out, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And we don't, for example, I'll switch over to meat. We got approval of FTEs and we didn't hire them because we didn't need them at the time, even after we got through the legislature.
Mr. Chair,
Further question?
this is Mike. Just to address Ms. Taylor's question is, of course, we only get to do this once every 10 years. And I think what is being requested here is the experience we have from past re-records. I think the big game changer would be if we go through re-record this upcoming time period, and let's say I'm not saying this is going to happen, but let's say we have 80% of people do it through an online methodology, and they're putting in their own information, and there's less compliance work and maybe more accuracy right away, less cleanup problems that have to take place. I think that will frame our new experience, that if it's happening majority online, that you don't maybe need as many staff. But of course, the last time we did it, there was not a high number of people. It was still a lot of paper-based opening mail, checking, rechecking, and I think we foresee that may still happen this time. But I think one of the things we'll see is if electronic methodologies begin to build those efficiencies in, if a lot of people choose to re-record through a method other than mail.
Mr. Chairman.
I have a question as to what pot this gets paid out of. Does this get paid after having gone through our audit and things we have to allocate and deal with? What does this get paid out of?
So you'll see that the fund source is a brand fee, and the specific brand fee would actually be the re-record fee itself, which we have divided into 10 segments, what we collected 10 years ago. And then of course you have the new brands and transfers coming in and putting new funds into that each year. So it's being paid for, so as re-record staff, it's being paid for by re-record itself.
So just a reminder for those on the board that audit changed some accounting practices. And so I don't know whether we have the money in 2022. I assume we do, from the re-record fees that are already paid. So that'll take a whack out of that budget year. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
But it's needed. Okay.
This is
go ahead.
Nina.
Yes.
Excuse me, just a comment. When we did this last time, they asked for temp from October 1st of 2020 to March 31st of 2022. And from January 1st of 2021 to March 31st of 2021. And November 1st of 2021 to January 1st of 2022. And this time, they're asking for the fill-in between the end of March, well, they're actually going to July, the end of March through, or the end of the 1st of July through March. Why was it not asked for consecutively the first time? Why was it split up, and why are we filling in this time?
So, Mr. Chair, Ms. Baucus, that's because these are one-time only positions. So we did not want to establish them as permanent FTEs within the department. So that's why you have to make a new request in the biennium, because these were approved by the legislature as one-time only expenses, meaning they would go away at the end of this biennium. So you have to do it that way unless you wanted to establish these as ongoing FTEs that would then become part of our base for the foreseeable future. And that's not what we intended. We intended these to be temporary, one time only, to get through re-record, and then those positions would go away.
Okay, any further questions? Those in favor
This is Sue.
signify by saying aye.
No,
Yes, Sue.
aye.
Aye.
Sue?
I'd forgotten we made a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sue,
Aye.
do you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Okay. Okay,
Nope,
those in
I don't.
favor signify by saying aye.
Did we have
Aye.
a motion?
Aye.
Is there,
Aye.
there is a, hold on a minute. There is a motion on the floor, is there not?
I don't know. I didn't hear
I
it.
can't remember.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll
or
move that we,
disapprove?
I'm so moved.
Is there a second?
I'll
Brett
second.
moved that we
Second.
approve it.
Second.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Hello? Those opposed? Okay. Do we have the information on the legal piece yet, or do we move on and come back? I'm going to move on and we'll come back. Okay, legislative. Item number 1. It's in the book. Foreign animal disease funding would be isolated, but allow the department to contribute a fixed amount to the fund on an annual basis, monetary cap. And so that's for the destroyed livestock. $10,000 per year from the department's budget. Per capita fees would be directed to an indemnity fund. Is there a motion one way or another? Okay, hearing no motion, I'll move on to the next one. The second one is swine. Make the practice of garbage feeding illegal in the state of Montana. Is there any motion?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
This is Sue. I'll second it.
It's been moved to second. Do we approve it? Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, is this just for people who are doing it, I mean, want to do it, I'm going to say legally, but that's not, I'm not quite sure what you do about the guy that's got 10 pigs in the backyard and feeds all the garbage in the world from if they feel like it. So how do you, what does this do? And I'm not trying to defend him or otherwise, but are we creating something here that we can't regulate? It's already in law, right? Is that
Animal
correct?
health?
Mr. Chair, this is Dr. Szymanski with the Animal Health Bureau. Correct, it is already a law on the books. So unless they're registered with the state of Montana and cooking that garbage, it is illegal now.
Further question. So Tani, if somebody has a few pigs and feeds garbage and somebody turns them in, what, I mean, do we have to, I understand the whole premise behind it. I'm just asking, are we, I don't know what we're doing here.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Taylor, so there is a provision in the existing language, and I believe that that's retained. I apologize, I don't have it open this morning. But for an individual feeding household waste to their owned pigs for their own consumption, there is an exemption in there. As far as the ones that we're more concerned about is somebody that's going to town, picking up restaurant waste or byproducts from a grocery store and taking those home and feeding them to their animals or obtaining them from an outside source. But we do periodically follow up on reports of, you know, people obtaining waste that is being fed to pigs to make sure that it's not, you know, prohibited material.
Like we had a guy feeding out of the distillery here.
That's what I, yeah. Okay, thank you.
The document under purpose that she's referring to says to make the practice of garbage feeding illegal in the state of Montana, except for the feeding of one's own household garbage to animals owned by them.
Okay.
It's been,
We own a
any
lot of
further
pigs.
there you go. I guess you can feed your own garbage. Well, maybe you can't.
No,
Then you're
I'm
selling.
just-
Then you're selling. Then you're selling them. Anyway, further
I have
discussion.
a question, John. I have a
Yes,
question.
Brent. Fire away.
You made a comment about somebody around you feeding pigs out of the distillery. That process would not be stopped under this bill, would it?
I don't know.
I mean, that's
Mr.
not
Chair.
garbage.
Mr. Chair, Mr. DeBrucker, this is Dr. Szymanski, Animal Health Bureau again. No, that distillers' grains are not garbage under the definition according to this section of code.
We're in business.
Can you give me the definition of the garbage, please?
It's
This is
animal.
Rob Stutz. I can.
Thank you.
Garbage means wastes resulting from the handling, preparation, cooking, and consumption of animal products, including animal carcasses or parts of animal carcasses, or other refuse of any character that has been associated with any animal products, including animal carcasses or parts of animal carcasses. And that's in 81.2.501, and all of the 81.2.500s are the treatment of garbage fed to swine provisions.
This Ed,
Is that Rob?
So the garbage really is.
some of these carcasses
Hold on a minute.
are taken to rendering.
Hold on just a second. Hold on, Ed, just a minute. The person, we didn't
Okay.
get, is that Rob that read that? Who read
Yeah,
that
that was Rob Stutz.
Thank you.
Rob
Okay,
Stutz.
Ed. Ed, you're on. You got a question?
That's not, that doesn't include rendering waste, does it? Waste that go to rendering plants and being rendered, and then coming back as a tallow or as a vegetable oil. That does not include that, does it? So we feed a
Mr.
lot
Chair,
of
members of the board, no,
rendering. Go ahead, Tony.
Dr.
It wouldn't-
Schmansky?
it would not include rendered products. Because the rendering, that's the cooking process associated with rendering.
This
Mr.
is Sue.
Chairman.
So the idea
this
is
is
just
Nina.
not to have any meat involved.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Brown, so
Mr. Chairman.
this is a request to modify it.
Hold on a minute. Hold on, so Sue Brown asked a
Mr. Chair,
question.
Mrs. Brown.
Dr. Schmansky, please answer.
This is a request to modify an existing
Somebody
section
fell off.
of Montana Code as it stands now.
That's all right. Mr. Chairman, this is
Dr.
Nina.
Schmansky,
Okay, if you're reading,
hold on a minute. Hold on. Dr. Schmansky is in the middle of a response. Let her finish.
As it stands now, Mr. Chair, Mrs. Brown, unless you are licensed with the state of Montana, it is illegal to feed garbage to swine. We are asking that we remove the provision for people to become licensed in the state of Montana. So we would make garbage feeding in the state of Montana completely illegal. Again, tied into the risk of diseases like African swine fever and foot and mouth disease.
Okay, Nina.
in reading the definition in statute, it says garbage means waste resulting from the handling, preparation, cooking, and consumption of animal products. It does not say meat. It says animal products. So does that include milk? Because it is not defined here as meat.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Bacchus.
Sounds like it might.
Yes, historically that has included milk.
So that means all the milk
And it sounds
that
like it-
recently had to find a new home, much of that probably was fed to pigs, and according to what you're trying to do here, that would be illegal. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, it is illegal now unless it was pasteurized prior to being fed to the pigs.
That definition made it sound like feeding renderings would be illegal. What am I missing in the
Right.
statutory definition that makes it okay?
Mr. Chairman, this is Rob Stutz.
There's nothing in the definition that says, it's, Mr. Chairman, it's for number 2, it says garbage feeder means a person who handles, prepares, cooks, or otherwise treats garbage to feed to swine. So that would cover the rendering, and it says you can't do it.
Rob Stutz.
Mr. Chairman, Rob Stutz. Another statute, 812509, is the statute that addresses cooking the garbage before feeding it to swine. That was the rendering statute that Tani was referring to earlier.
And it says what?
All garbage, regardless of previous processing, shall, before being fed to swine or other animals, be thoroughly heated to at least 212 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 30 minutes unless treated in some other manner which is approved in writing by the department as being equally effective for the protection of public and animal health.
Okay, further questions? Further questions? Those in favor signify by saying.
If it includes,
There is a motion, isn't there?
John,
Go ahead, Ed.
John is Ed. I have a question.
Go ahead.
If it includes rendering, we feed a lot of rendering, and I would withdraw my second. But I'm sure that these renderers have okayed it with the state to bring, they bring oils in, like tallow or restaurant grease that they take back and reconstitute it, heat it, screen it, and bring it back, and then we feed it, mainly for dust control. But we feed byproducts
Okay, so
from renderers, from licensed renderers. And if it includes rendering, I'll withdraw my second.
I think Rob Stutz is saying it does not include rendering because of that
Well,
statute.
then
Is that correct, Rob?
Mr. Chairman, the current statute has that exclusion for rendered products. I don't know what the legislative proposal, how that would address it.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
so-
members of the board, this is.
Go ahead.
I will have to go back and look at the request. Our intent would not be to exclude the ability to feed rendered products. So we would make sure that that language is clear in there so that doesn't become an exclusion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Sue.
Okay, so hold on a minute. So I'm, Ed, what's your position on are you withdrawing your second? Until it's checked out?
I'm withdrawing, I'm withdrawing my second until we have further reference to what all it includes.
Okay, and the person who made the motion.
They're gonna.
This is Sue.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Sue. Yes.
We also feed pasteurized whey to pigs. So I would remove my motion as well. I don't know if I'm.
Okay, the motion and second have been
remember.
withdrawn. The motion and second have been withdrawn till further consideration. And so will be no vote. We'll move on to the next one.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. Can I ask you something first?
Yes.
Where did this request come from?
animal health.
Dr.
I
Szymanski?
believe, Lila, the purpose of this request is to try to be preemptive, to try to stop things like African swine fever and diseases of that nature into this area. So, you know, maybe there's a little more work that needs to be done to answer all of our questions, but the effort that's being made here, I believe, is the right one.
Yeah, I'm not, Mr. Chairman, I'm not against it. I just want to know if it's this sort of loosey-goosey, why it, I mean, I understand about trying to preempt. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a registered garbage feeder. So, or a licensed garbage feeder. I just was kind of curious that we don't, you know, bind ourselves up in our businesses that exist by trying to preempt something. It was a legitimate question.
Okay, so the motion and the second's been withdrawn. And Dr. Szymanski said she was going to do some checking on what's included and not. So rather than vote for or against it, we'll move on to the third one. Anybody want to cover
Mr.
it?
Chair, this is Mike. I didn't hear anybody jump in, so I'll jump in. We did discuss this one yesterday. The regulation of custom exempt facilities. This was addressing the fact that our statute is more permissive than our rules and is actually more permissive than the federal law that we need to meet or exceed with regard to custom exempt processing. I would also point out that we, because of our rules and because of our practice, this is basically reinforcing the practice that is already taking place. So it's changing no activity that takes place with custom exempts. It's just making sure that our statute doesn't hang us up in a future FSIS audit.
I'd move
Okay,
this.
is there a motion? Is there a second?
I made the motion. I'll make the motion.
Right. Is there a second?
This is Sue. I'll second
Is there a
it.
second?
I'll second it, John, but I have a comment.
This is
before we move
Sue.
on.
I'll second it.
Okay, we got a second, and Sue seconded it, and Brett, you have a comment.
So I don't have any issue with squaring up our rules or regulations. I just want to make sure I go on record that, you know, we're short of processing plants in this state, not long on them. And I want to make sure it's clear that this isn't going to add burdens to these custom plants over and above of what's already being done. Now, Mike, you just explained it, so I believe it, but I just want to be on record that that's clear.
Mr. Chairman, this is Gary Hamel with the Meat and Poultry Inspection Bureau. To answer Mr. Gebrucker's concern, there will be no changes in our approach to regulating custom exempt facilities. We'll still inspect them 2 times a year, and at various times throughout the year as issues arise. It will not impact our regulation of customs.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that the legislation proceed. Any further questions? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none? Okay. So, I assume that we don't have, we can come back to the legislation, and we'll come back to the attorney proposal. But let's go ahead and move on with the rest of the agenda for now, which I believe puts us in. You want a break or you want to keep going? Without objection, we'll keep going.
Keep going.
Fiscal Bureau.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to point out that in reference to an earlier conversation about cost of legal, you do have your legal folks on the line if you wanted to get that out of the way so that you could release them from the meeting.
I think the issue is the cost as opposed to anything from them personally or directly.
But, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about their legal update.
Oh,
that's on the agenda for later in the morning.
I got you. So we can save expense and cut down all this exorbitant cost, right?
That's
okay.
Correct.
So I'll move right to that. Sorry, Mike, I was on the wrong page. Okay, so let's go to the legal update in the order then. Legal counsel update. Kyle Chenoweth and Rob Stutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle Chenoweth is here. I guess I can go first. From looking at the agenda, it looks like I might be here just to answer some questions regarding the administrative attachment memo that we talked about last month. And I think there was a number of board members who were unable to read it before we discussed it. And so at this point, I'm wondering if it'd just be best to open the floor up to any questions on this administrative attachment analysis.
Great, thank you, Kyle. And was the letter sent that was requested by the board to the attached agencies?
This is Mike. Yes, we did give this document to the attached agencies. Kyle's research.
Are there any questions of Kyle then relative to any pieces of that report that he provided for us during the last meeting? And he covered the employee relationship, the budget activity, legislature, contact with the governor's office, etc. All that he reported to us. Okay, thank you, Kyle, for being here. And then
thank you.
I would assume that under that document, as I read it, that if we see that a budget of an attached agency is being overspent, that it's our job to notify their board. Would that be correct? That's a question.
Under my analysis, yes, that would be correct. From the way I read the statute, and if Rob sees it differently, he can chime in. But the way I see it, the board, as the head of the department, has the ability to oversee these budgetary concerns and to right the ship if it needs to be righted.
Okay, that was a question raised by one of the board members based upon the report filed last time by the attached agency. Okay, anything else? Okay, Kyle, thank you very much. Pardon?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rob, litigation update if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 3 items. The first item is the K&C enforcement action. Following the last meeting, we moved to dismiss. That has been dismissed by the court, and so that litigation is resolved. Are there any questions about K&C meets? All right. The second thing, at the last meeting, I got a question about the status of the potential claim against the laboratory regarding the rabies and the bat. And at that time, there had been no update. Since then, the only update is that the claimant has contacted an attorney in Montana has retained an attorney in Montana who contacted Risk Management Tort Defense just to get background information about the claim. And as far as any more specific details about the potential claim. I don't have any, but Risk Management Tort Defense was going to respond to that request for information. Are there any questions about that claim? Okay, and then the last item, unless the board members have any questions, the last item is just to inform the board that the Cottonwood Lawsuit, which was a lawsuit regarding bison management and in particular hunting of bison in the Yellowstone National Park area. The department was dismissed from that case. It went up to the Ninth Circuit. It has come back from the Ninth Circuit. It still retains the governor's office as a state defendant, although the governor is attempting to be dismissed from that litigation as well. And I just wanted to notify the board that legal counsel, myself, and some department staff have assisted the governor when they've had informational type questions about the status on the ground so that they can best address the various questions that come up regarding that litigation and the motion to dismiss. Are there any questions about the Cottonwood lawsuit? With that, Mr. Chairman, unless board members have...
What kind of inquiry and questions are we talking about relative to the department responding to? And how are we responding? Are we responding by definitions, affidavit, just verbally over the phone? What are we doing?
Mr. Chairman, for example, we've provided information to the attorney for the governor's office about the status on the ground of hazing. Dr. Zalewski prepared a declaration, it's a federal lawsuit, about the hazing operations. But primarily, we've just been answering questions, and I have also reviewed some of the briefing just at their request.
Well, the reason I asked the question, I'm mindful of another action in the state of Montana that Mr. Chenoweth was handling, where information going back and forth was an issue. And so if there's a written declaration provided by the department, the board should probably be aware and see it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can request that the attorney for the governor forward that to Mike if he doesn't have it already. I did not draft that declaration. That was a communication between the governor's attorney and the department, but I did facilitate the flow of information informally when those questions came up about what the status was on the ground.
Well, at some point we can't do it now because of your involvement in that other activity, but we probably should have a discussion of how we respond to lawsuits at some point.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I'll note that in this case, the department is not a party to the lawsuit. It was dismissed quite some time ago as a defendant, and so it's only the governor's office. And so these requests are requests from the governor's council.
I understand, but
okay.
The other action I'm talking about, we weren't a party either. So anyway, I don't want to get into it because you have a conflict. So, okay, any further questions? Okay, great. Let's go on to, thank you, Rob. Let's go on to centralized services. Fiscal Bureau update, per capita status report.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Brian Simonson, Deputy Executive Officer. The board has a packet in front of them. Tab 3 contains the April 2020 budget status and projection reports for the public. There's a link to follow along with that on our Board of Livestock page. To give the per capita fee status update report, I direct you to page 26, the last page on that tab report. Got a gray look to the heading. Everybody there?
Yep.
Okay. As of May 14th, the Department of Revenue reporting of per capita fee collections improved dramatically. We improved about $644,000 from last month to this month, and that's due to adding, the Department of Revenue added approximately 3,000 non-filers to the report that they then sent out bills to. So that timing issue created quite a difference between last month's report and this month's report. As you can see in Evan's notes, collections grew 117,000 for the month to amount to $2,337,645 in total, but are still down, as he notes, $723,558 or 24% from last year. Through communications with the Department of Revenue, they remain optimistic that those funds will be made up through the bill notices that went out just last week. That's my report for that page, if there's any questions.
Questions on per capita?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. We budgeted 4.9 million is what we put in the budget for 2020 for per capita. And looking at his figures here, as of May 14th, we have collected less than half of what we budgeted for. And if we are only collecting half of what it's budgeted for, then we have a real serious problem.
Ms. Bacchus, this report is only 3 days, I think, past when the mailings went out. And so the numbers aren't too far off from typically this time each year that it goes out. I mean, it is down, like I said, 24%, but we do expect, or should I say, revenue certainly expects it to get most, if not all of that money made up.
We had two questions last time. One, from a data standpoint, number of head of livestock versus last year reported so far, and number of persons or entities reporting. What happened with that information?
I mean, the percentages now are within, less than 1% difference between last year and this year as of May 14th. So,
in what category?
In
livestock or reports? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's across the board. If you look at the cattle numbers, you're talking 1.88 million versus 1.87 million. If you're looking at revenue, it's 4.95 versus 4.90. So it's pretty much across the board. They're really tight numbers. Now, we are down as far as how much money we've brought in compared to last year, like I said, $723,000, but that could just be because bills went out later, 2 weeks later this year than they did last year. I think that's a true statement.
Well, I'm looking at, I'm not sure I'm reading this right. I think the question was asked whether or not we have fewer people, entities filing their report, and do we have fewer head of livestock? And so I'm assuming that because 3,000 bills were sent out, that's the answer to the number of entities reporting.
No, so the way the process works is that before they send out the bills, they add everybody who didn't report, and then they use their reports from last year, which is those 3,000 people, but that's no different than it is every year they do it that way.
Well, so, okay, so it has to be one or the other, right? It has to be either we had fewer entities, people, whatever, reporting, and or fewer headcount and categories paid for.
I'm contending that the numbers are within 1% of each other from year to year.
So you're saying there's no difference?
I am. I'm
Okay,
saying the difference last month was a timing issue of when those bills went out.
okay.
Mr. Chairman,
But let me ask this, I don't get it. 2020, hold on just a second. 2020 head count for cattle.
What page are you on?
I'm page 26. 2020 head count for cattle is 1872052, right?
Yes, sir.
And head count for 2019 at this time, I assume it's at this time, is 1888148. Right?
Right.
So that says there's 16,000 fewer head of cattle reporting. And they're the big number. So if I multiply that by the reported number, then we're pretty close. But then I look up as the amount paid, then they must not be paying on the reported number. So how do you get a reported number that's different than a number paid?
The amount paid, again, I think is really related to the idea that the bills went out earlier last year than they did this year. So the amount of money that we're reporting as collected this year is down that 24%. If bills went out on March 11th, or I'm sorry, May 11th, we're gonna have to hold on for another, month or the end of this month to see what comes in. But right now, the difference is really explained in a matter of the bills went out later this year.
So you're saying is that they reported the same number of head, because some of the board was concerned about whether the head count was reduced. So we're within 16,000 head right now, cattle-wise reported.
Less than
right?
1%. Yes.
Okay. And so you're just saying that even though those are reported, people just haven't paid for whatever reason.
Right. They got the bills late and we expect them to pay.
I'll just throw in, John, that we just received ours a week ago and we just paid.
So what's the expectation for the online, I'm going to call it a bill, because the numbers come out and they tell you what to pay and show you where to pay it, right? So that's one billing side.
I'm not sure I understand the question, sir.
Well, when I get my notice of reporting my number of livestock, they tell me how much to pay. Does it not?
It does.
Okay, and so at that stage in the game, I report it and I pay it. So there must be activity taking place where people report it but don't pay it.
Right.
And then a bill comes. Is that what's happening?
That's correct.
Correct. There's a big half of the people, either half what makes up those people who have not paid yet. I'd say half of those are estimates from last year of people who didn't file in February, and the other big chunk of that is people who filed in February but didn't pay.
Didn't pay.
So they're waiting.
Okay, great. All right.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
No, go ahead.
So you're counting in this last year's number, and the people who didn't file, you're just in this number is last year's numbers that they filed on and paid on.
3,000 of them, Miss Taylor.
Okay. And how many cattle or whatever? How much money was that? Do you know of this total?
I'm sorry, I don't know the number of that. It looks like if I look at last month's report, we gained about 230,000 head of cattle from last month to this month. So I think you could say that those 3,000 reports, most of those would have amounted to that gain in cattle.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on per capita?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina.
Yes.
Question for you, Brian. On page 26, you list head counts for 2019. And in looking at last year, the head counts that you gave us for June of 2019 are not necessarily the same as the head counts that you give us on page 26 for 2019. And they're not, terribly significant one way or another, other than when you multiply them, each individual class of livestock against its tax, in which case you lost about $22,000 between the figures you had in June last year compared to the figures you put on page 26. So my question to you is, which set of numbers are correct?
I think not looking at them, but I guess I'm gonna just go with the blanket statement that they're correct at the time that they're being reported. So
You're telling me that the numbers you gave us last year in June of 2019 were correct numbers. And when you listed 2019 on page 26, they got reduced.
that's because
And we lost $22,000 in per capita by the change.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, this is Evan. Can I interject here?
Sure.
Yes. So Ms. Bacchus, the 2019 numbers that you're seeing on the report here that we're just reporting is for the same day last year. So when people get their bills after in May, then they will come back and they will call into the Department of Revenue and they will make changes and say that, or maybe say, hey, I don't own any cattle. And that would be why there would be a reduction in those numbers. So when you're looking at this report again, it's May 14th of 20 and May 14th of 2019.
Okay, thank you. That makes more sense.
Okay, other questions on per capita? Okay, next one, Brian.
I'm gonna, before I move off.
Hold on. Yes?
Brett is, there we go. Brett was muted, but he was trying to get your attention.
Thanks,
Oh, I'm
Lila.
Yeah.
I couldn't
question
see
on that per capita. I'm sorry, I was muted. I'll try to be more on top of the game. The question I have is in the reports filed. We're down about 700 total reports from 19 to 20. Evan or Brian, are there any comments on that at this point? I mean, I expect they'll come in, but I just want to know if you had any comments on it.
Mr. Drucker,
This is Evan.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, Evan.
Okay, yeah, this is Evan. So I think possibly some of this going back to last year, and I don't know where the big difference is, but some of those folks after May 14th last year calling in and saying we don't own livestock, that might be part of the reason why there's a decrease in the number this year. But I don't know if it would be 700 head count, or if they hadn't gotten all of their they had gotten all of their estimations completed by this time. So for the 2020, so try and disregard what I just tried to say.
Well, with any luck, that number will come together a little bit on the next report.
But Brett's question, I would like to Yeah, I was going to attempt to ask Brett's question or answer Brett's question maybe a little more directly, which is if there is a reduction of a few hundred, that is indicative of a trend that we have been seeing over the past few years. So if you look, we lost some reporters between between 18 and 19, 19 and 20. And so there has been a slight trend of having a few less reporters than the year before. And we've had that conversation before where, some assumptions might be made about concentration happening inside the industry or changes in how people do business as opposed to 3 individuals paying per capita. Maybe they've changed their business structure and there's 1 reporter where there used to be 3. But there is a trend line there that is slightly down that I've noticed over the 4.5 years I've been here.
Well, let me comment, because I think Brett is right where I started, and I don't get it. Because you're telling me that in the data points that we have 16,000 fewer head of cattle, for example, reported. Isn't that what the graph says?
Yep.
To date. And down in the footnote, you're telling me that there are 688 fewer reports. That means 688 fewer reports in the 16,000 head of cattle. They each own 23 head. I know that's facetious, but that's what the data is telling us. So I don't understand. Then what you're telling me is that 688 fewer people owned almost the same number of cattle. So that's your consolidation issue? Something doesn't make sense.
This is Brian, and I don't know if I'm going to answer the question, but my assumption on the 688 was that what is happening here is that 688, I'm just going to keep using that number of reporters in last year, or should I say 2 years ago, they fell off the rolls last year because they didn't have any cattle and they didn't make any reports. So there's less of those. And I'm just going to make an assumption that most of those people are in the small producer category, so that they're going to have less of an impact on the number of cattle going forward from year to year. And so, and maybe it is that more of the people who did report have more cattle than they had last year. But that 688, I think, is predominantly people who fell off the per capita fees from one year to the next. That's my 2 cents on it.
It's also important to note that the 688 are not all cattle reporters. That's 688 out of all livestock reports. The actual number of cattle, the decline in cattle reporters is some fraction of 688.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, but I said that goes back to the question that I asked and Brett asked as well. So I guess we'll find out. What we're saying is that the people who have reported 688 fewer than last year are going to make up the number. So,
Mr. Chairman, this is Evan. If you look at that report, it shows about 200 fewer cattle reporters and over 500 horse reporters, or 500 fewer horse reporters this year. So it's a combination of several different people, but the horse reporters are the ones reducing the most.
So that means that the cattle reporters averaged about 80 head.
Yes, 80 to 90, yes.
Okay, next one.
So again, before I move off of this page, because I don't have a section really for reporting on the equine per capita fee letters that went out, I did want to make a note here, and it's kind of related to per capita fee collections, that Evan has been fielding numerous calls. He's got tons of return mail. But on the bright side, Evan's been reporting that new per capita fee payers have been coming into the system, and we think we're connecting that as a result of those per capita fees. Evan might have some up-to-date statistics on that. Share with the board.
Mr. Chairman, this is Evan again. I do have run a report off of the revenue website this morning. And at this point, it looks like we have about 174 new reporters at 8 o'clock this morning. We added about 600 head of horses, over 3,000 cows, and a lot of chickens. So far, it looks like it's generated about $11,000 of addition per capita. And that before, I mean, that's only 8 days into this.
How many head of cattle?
3,061. And that's 36 new reporters.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Sounds like it's working, huh?
I think so.
Special revenue report.
Hey, we're going to turn to the multicolored special revenue comparison report on page 1. I'll just kind of work my way down in the brands area. You can see that dealer license, we're reporting as of the end of April, was down 25,000. Those dealer license renewals just went out this last month, and we'll be collecting money over the next month. So I would expect to see that number improve quite a bit in the next report. Market inspections did $80,000 in business for the month of April. That's 26,000 less than last April, but still overall, you can see in the report that we're about 89,000 to the positive for the year. The per capita fee collections report, I hesitate to mention much on that because of the report we just had is a couple weeks newer than this report. But both of the reports are showing, you know, some incremental gains of per capita fee over this time from last month. So we're making improvements there.
What, before you keep going, what about your local inspections issue in revenue?
We did gain about 4,000 from the end of March to the end of April, but you know, as you can see there, we're down, but we did close the gap $4,000 in a month of activity.
Are we just having fewer inspections, I assume, huh?
That might be a brands question.
Mr. Chair, this is Mike. Well, fewer local inspections being done by our staff, because obviously the vast majority of local inspections are done by local inspectors and we don't realize that revenue. And I'd be hesitant to do too much deep analysis on it because it seems to flip-flop a lot based on how people are moving cattle. Some years we're way up on inspections they're asking our market staff to do. And then in other years, it's less and more of it's being driven to local inspectors. But I mean, I think it's safe to assume if based on what we've seen with going through the markets in the last 2 months that obviously inspections are down because movements are down. I can say that with pretty good certainty about the last 2 months. But as far as the year going back before COVID-19, that just could be people are using local inspectors more than they're using our staff.
Well, the concern is we're a third down, right, in total revenue, and we're almost the end of the year. Okay.
Yes, sir. Animal health didn't have any change for the month. Milk inspection is up 2,000 over last month. Eggs are down 9,000, but those are pretty much within variances. The diagnostic lab revenue had another good month. At 92,000 in receipts for the period. They closed the gap 10,000 last month and 14,000 this. So doing well there in the recent couple months. And then lastly, that volunteer wolf donation fund tripled in the last month, mostly I guess because of fishermen, but that's up 18,500. That's my report for this page.
Questions for Brian on the page? Further questions?
Yeah, I have,
Mr.
Chairman, Lila, I have a question for Brian. Will you make the wolf statement again about the fishermen? What did you just say about because of the fishermen?
Well, the fishing license renewals is about this time period last month. So I'm assuming that everybody going out to get conservation and fishing license renewals this year is why we're seeing a big spike in the wolf donations.
When you buy a fishing license, conservation license, they ask you a question if you'd like to donate to the wolf fund.
Okay, thank you. Makes more sense now.
Okay. Moving on to page 2, the April 30 expense projection report. Of course, in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that we're continuing the trend for FY20. Livestock ending balance is projecting an additional $65,000 over last month to a total of $875,500 approximately ending projections of unspent authority. Okay. Last month, I was asked to address overtime and travel budget overages. So we can see those in the overtime this month of $53,028, and for travel, $42,153 individually. For overtime, $40,000 of that $53,000 overage is a product of under budgeting expected overtime in the meat and poultry inspection program. So if you want to turn to page 12 of the report, you'll see there under overtime, the FY 2020 budget was only $16,600 approximately. A part of that 40,000 or overage there is related to vacancies. So this is expected. As it happens throughout the department, we must budget for 98% employment. And so when we have big vacancies, as we've had in the meat through the year, we're going to have salary savings that naturally shift from salaries to overtime to cover, for missing personnel. So that's a big chunk of that 40,000. The other part of it is we have people in the meat department or meat inspection that are having to travel great distances, either in eastern Montana or western Montana. And so those rack up overtime charges for all that driving time. And we probably could have done a better job as far as expecting those budget numbers and beefed up the overtime numbers a little bit more than that 16,000. So part of it's expected and part of it we probably should have had some plussed up that number a bit. Okay, I'm going to go back to page 2 again. For travel, and really for all operational budget figures, I'd like to first observe that those figures are based on both past expenditure trends and program inputs at the beginning of the year. Additionally, they change throughout the year as this level of budgeting is, really only managerial in scope. And so we make changes as the years goes through, and maybe we should have been making changes a little bit more promptly in these couple categories. For travel specifically, the 42,000 overage is attributed to 12,000 in CSD. That's a product of under budgeting. If you just look across the page on page 3. Sorry here. You'll see that we only budgeted, I'm trying to look at two things at once. We only budgeted $2,947 in travel. The Board of Livestock travel, just in itself, is averages between $6,000 and $9,000 annually, and then the remainder of that over budgeting or overspending, if you want to call it, from the budget, is kind of related to ITS and executive officer travel. ITS this year certainly has done a lot of trips to markets and to Bozeman. So really that's a product of needing to put some more money in that budget category.
Okay, questions for Brian?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. Brian, the board does the same travel basically all the time. So how could that have been misbudgeted so much? I mean, if we always do the same travel year after year, why was it underestimated?
I call it an oversight.
And whoops.
Yeah, and again, not that it's pretty small numbers, Ms. Bacchus, so, you know, we just looked at it in the aggregate and missed it. We should have put more money in there.
I would say to you before you came, Brian, the same problem has existed in previous budget cycles. So I don't know what happened last year, but it has been, that part of the budget has received some money in the past from other places.
Okay, I did have a couple more categories in travel to talk about if I could just close it out. So if you turn back again to meet on page 12, you're gonna see that travel there is overspent from the budget, 24,000, or just a little over. Again, that represents an increase for kind of related to the overtime and that, but it relates to a lot of 24,000 in increases in in-state lodging and per diem. And a lot of that has to do with either covering places for missing people, especially in eastern Montana, or long distances that we're expecting our meat inspectors to travel in western Montana. So part of it, we should have plussed that up if we are intending for our meat inspectors to travel long distances, and part of it is explained by salary savings or covering for missing personnel. The last
well, but before you go off to that one, you keep saying the salary savings, and the salary savings aren't showing up. But let me ask a different question. When did we put the 2 new positions in? When did we fill those?
Somebody's gonna have to help me out there.
This is Marty Zalewski. I believe it was last summer. Gary, if you're on, you can provide a more accurate a date.
Yes, we started filling those positions last summer. The new inspectors have been on now for approximately 4 months, the latest 2. There's been several positions that have been open, but the 2 new positions were last year.
Okay, so have you had it all anytime this year, the full FTE base filled?
Mr. Chairman, as of the last couple of months, we've been fully staffed.
So for the last 2 months?
Mr. Chairman, yes, for approximately 2 months, we've been fully staffed.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. Gary, I noticed in your report you've had considerable uptake in people interested in facilities, whether it's custom kill or whatever it is. What kind of effect is that going to have on travel and so forth? Because if it's going to increase the travel, then of course they're going to have to do more with your page here, along with everything else.
Mr. Chairman, I am in the process of analyzing potential impacts. We are tracking very carefully how many new applicants that we are receiving, as well as inquiries. And I'm in the process of planning for those kinds of impacts, overtime being one of those. And I've not gotten to the point where I have outcomes yet.
Will you have that in time for the budget?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I will have that information available shortly.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have one. Based upon the budget funding projection, will be 81,000 short at the end of the year. Where will that, I'm assuming that is half general fund and half matching fund, or is it all general fund? And what is the source that you will pay it out of?
It is all general fund, Mr. Scully. And as we have done, I think, for quite a few years, when we have that situation, we get support out of other general fund categories within Program 4.
I know. I was asking, what program are you looking at?
Well, if you look, yeah, I would say it's a combination of DSA and the lab. DSA currently is projecting out 172,000 overage. I don't think that number is going to be the ending number, but it is considerably over. And then the lab would that's kind of a mix between per capita fee and general fund and the fees, how that shakes out at the end of the year.
Well, one of the things that's bothering me, and I'm off the subject here a little bit, is that I don't share the current rosy colored glasses of the budget position the state's going to be in at the beginning or during next session. And so general fund I'm concerned about it. And so for those in the DSA, as we march through, having had the request for the increase, and then having our previous request denied or altered or reduced, depending on how you look at it, I think we have to be awfully careful how we look at DSA general fund dollars so that we don't lose them. So if we reach in, if we're overstated in general dollars, even after they reduced them during the budget cycle, and then we're asking for more, we probably ought to make sure we have our pencils sharp as to the rationale. But that's something for probably September, October. Because if there truly was vacancy savings and now you're in it fully staffed for 2 months and you've got 2 months left to go, then that number of 81,000 isn't going to go down any.
Mr. Scully, I would agree that we probably are going to repeat this in the next fiscal. I would assert that, in the personnel, that $60,000 down that we're showing right now, the snapshot is going to really assist us there, seeing how we've gone through union negotiations this past year. So that going into the next fiscal, that should right the ship. Hopefully in that category would be the expectation.
How much of that 59 is the union increase, do you know?
It's a convoluted mix between vacancies and the union increase, so I don't have that number in front of me.
Okay, thanks. Later.
Mr. Chair, this is Mike. I will speak to the fact that the difference is significant, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is the timing of our 2-year labor organization contract is off cycle with the biennium. And so it does create a challenge that the last 2 cycles, mid-biennium, our CBA comes up again and we go in, and of course, those personnel changes, let's say it's $1 an hour, for example, for employees, that's what ends up getting negotiated out at the table. At the end of the day, that is not in the pay plan that the legislature approved in House Bill 2, and that's what kind of puts us in this situation. It would be better if when we did go to a labor organization, if we had gone to it in a year where it would have been lined up with the biennium, but it has to, from the date of ratification, it has to be 2 years from that point moving forward. And so it does put us in a difficult spot being off cycle.
Yeah, and I guess the real concern I have, Mike, is that in the scheme of things, if the DSA dollars are used to balance the budget relative to the meat inspection program, maybe we need to start looking at some other solution in the meat inspection program or timing mechanism, because it's going to eventually jeopardize the DSA for the state, and that would be a huge problem. I mean, you'd wind up with a major reaction to the detriment of the industry that wouldn't be good.
And Mr. Chair, I think the way to fix that is to try, although I do understand maybe the futility of that given what overall state revenues are looking like and maybe what the future would be, is to look for more funding, more general fund, therefore we can get more federal match in meat and poultry inspection. Because the reality is, if we weren't on the positive side in those other general fund categories, there'd be no general fund to shift to meat and poultry, and then we'd be looking at House Bill 3 or something of that nature, trying to close that gap. And that's the reality. If the general fund is not there or in a excess category, we wouldn't be able to use it. And so if that gets cut in the lab, if it gets cut in the DSA, then there is no backup. This year we're lucky there possibly is a backup, but in future years it may not be there. So probably what we should be looking at doing, now that I'm thinking about it through the EPP process, is asking for more dollars in the meat and poultry inspection program and trying to make that happen. And of course, the result will be what the result will be.
Yeah, so let me ask one more clarifying question and then get out of here. It's general fund dollars in the 81,000. Does that mean that we lose the match? Not lose isn't the right word, but we don't get the match, right?
We're expending all of the match that we have. So yeah.
But if we had, let's just say for discussion purposes, we had the additional $100,000 right now, would it be matched?
Yes, I believe it would be. I might need some clarification from Evan on that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Evan. Towards the end of the year, and Gary can help out with a little bit too. Of course, we have to, FSIS may have additional funding available. They send out emails to the rest of the country and say, hey, they ask if anybody has extra funds and who needs extra funds. So they kind of reconcile what their excess budget, if they have any excess budget over that. But that happens after, towards the end of the year, like in August. Gary, is that correct?
That's correct.
So I guess my ending comment there would be that as far as this fiscal year is concerned, what we have is what we have through the end of June.
Right. I'm just worried about the DSA jeopardizing. Anyway, okay, moving on. Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, before we move on too far, could we take about 3 minutes personal break?
Sure. It's what is it? It's what time is it now? It's 10:07. How about we start again at 10:30?
Good.
Thank you.
The meeting back to order. We have Lila and Nina and Sue. Are you on? Sue?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay.
Yes.
Brett on?
He's there. He's there.
I am
okay.
on.
Okay. And Ed, you're on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah.
The centralized services expense. Anything more on that?
Chair Scully, yeah, I've got lots more. So I'm going to drive back to page 2 again. And just make a general comment about the personnel expenses that you see there, that they're relatively unchanged for the month. And as I've reported before, that $386,000 you're looking at there is half of that's in the brands division, and then another third of that is in the lab. So, and then the rest is kind of dispersed for basically vacancies in the department. Okay.
Not hold on just a second. None of that will be affected by the snapshot, correct?
No, the snapshot is going to capture new positions that we approve and pay raises that we approve. So vacancies are already built into the, I mean, they go through the snapshot unchanged.
That's not pretty.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, since we explored those two negatives in the budget, I figure we better look at the shortages. So that contracts is reporting 300,377 over, and then other expenses is the other really significant one at 121,000. So I just wanted to briefly try and cover those a little bit. On the contract side, 105.7 thousand of that is in CSD. We over budgeted there because we had in the budget at that time ITSD charges that we then shifted to the other programs through this new budget year, and we didn't make the changes in the contracts budget. So that was an oversight that should have got done. 134,000 of that is in the DSA, and we expect most of all of that to go away once we get the Brucellosis testing payments worked out through the lab. So when I reported earlier that the DSA is going to have 175,000 in general fund, I think, you know, most or 130 of that is going to be absorbed through outstanding Brucellosis testing payments. 44.5 thousand of that is in the federal umbrella, and I think I'm not an expert in this category, but I think from our meetings, monthly meetings, I can say that we've had reduced epi testing this year, and that's resulting in that the less testing. So 44.5 thousand down in testing there, and then lastly, 50,000 of that 300,000 is in the shielded egg program, and you know we budgeted there for growth in that industry, and I think we know that excess authority is present. Moving to the other.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead.
Wait a minute, Brian. You're a little fuzzy on my computer. What was the 105,000 for?
So in CSD, over on the next page, you can see that we've got page 3. You can see we've got 105,000 overage there. Those are ITSD state charges from the ITSD department, or they last year, in the previous year, they were all budgeted or paid for out of CSD. This year, Evan got restricted accounts created, and we moved 105 or so of those ITSD charges from CSD to meat and to the lab and to, you know, the various other programs, brands in the department. So that we didn't take it out of the budget.
So he's making money. Good work.
For CSD. It's a net zero, really, in the end.
Oh, come on.
Okay. The 121,000 in other expenses. So again, a little over budgeting in CSD of 85,000, and that's mostly related to that. And you'd see if you looked in the comparison reports for CSD that it's about this time of the year that we paid that $190,000 settlement charge, and that got factored into the budget process for this year. And so we overestimated how much we were going to need in the budget for other expenses where that settlement charge hit against us. So that explains that portion of it. The remainder is made up in reduced indirect fees for this year. Meat's a good example of that. Their indirect fees went down 24,000. And then we have a budget mark in that other expenses for Pro Card processing. So if we have Pro Card expenses that come due and we don't know where they go to the appropriate accounts, we put them down in other expenses. So brands is a good example. There's $6,000, in Pro Card expenses that need to be allocated. So that's what drives that number positive for that area. So that explains where the 121 comes from.
Terrific.
Okay.
Questions for Brian?
Say again.
I'm just asking if there's any questions.
Oh.
Okay.
The last two notes I would make, unless you want to go through pages individually on this projection report, is again, as I've said before, milk inspection, is a program of concern. It's the only program projecting to outspend their budget authority, and we'll have to make that authority up somewhere else. We do have the cash to cover that, but it is a concern going forward that we're going to need to look at milk inspection fees and adjust if we continue in this trend. And then that general fund, even though it says 108,000 to the good there, as I mentioned earlier, I think that number is going to disappear and be pretty tight for the year as we process these DSA bills. So I think the general fund is of concern this year too. That would conclude my general statement.
Okay, so the note you just ended on then makes that meat $100,000 pop-up red flag a big deal.
Well, it's already factored into that number of 108,000 positive, so it's part of the DSA. So let's say.
Oh, it is. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Then the milk issue, having had a bunch of time spent on the milk fee issue previously with the hearings in Bozeman and all that, the number of dairies going down, but the milk inspections are up. Is that what we're saying?
No, our expenses are exceeding. Our revenue coming in from milk inspections is pretty steady. I think that the fact is that we have less places we're inspecting, but our expenses are still the same, so we're not covering our expenses with the revenue that we have.
I know, but I just see that seems strange where if you're projecting forward your budget and you extrapolate 10% or whatever expects growth, and then that occurs, but then you have fewer places to inspect, you'd think you'd save money. Anyway, later.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mike, and I guess maybe Brian can help me out here, but I also want to make sure that I'm on the right page, even with Brian, when we're thinking about that what I see is driving the negatives on milk and egg inspection program is the personal services, and I'm not sure how much of that is still driven by the
retirements
payouts that we did at the retirements, and then of course right now we're on hold with those two positions. So I just wonder how much of a correction that will. I mean, it's too late in the year for it to really help us for this year, but how much of that is going to be a problem in the next year?
Gotcha. Got it.
Yeah.
So it's milk and egg combined. Okay, thanks. Other questions?
John,
okay.
This is live. I have a question that's not for Brian or anybody, but I have a question about and I guess it's the DSA, the people who have not voluntarily tested. At what point does that become a problem? I mean, if they're not voluntarily testing because of what happened last fall, when does that become a problem as far as do you mandate? I mean, if it's voluntary, you can't mandate them. But are we concerned about that or not?
Animal health?
This is Dr. Marty Zalewski. I guess I would just say that, I mean, it's voluntary by definition, right? And so therefore, a lot of the testing that's been going on that's been most significantly impacted is discretionary testing that happens in the fall when animals are run through the chute for pregnancy checking or and other work. The Animal Health Bureau, or the Animal Health Bureau and I, as a state veterinarian, obviously encourage that testing. We have been paying for that test, and the more testing, the better. As far as pulling tests on animals that are at risk, so within the DSA. Having said that, we removed the mandatory herd testing requirement that we had earlier in the prior decade, and we're relying on voluntary testing with the philosophy that testing animals that are moving or being sold protects the buyers, but testing your own herd as part of a herd test really protects you. So, that was the theory, and obviously the board has previously supported that position, and we stand ready to change that policy if the board would request.
Okay, I was just concerned about it, and I know if I were an operator in that area, I'd probably be shying away from the voluntary thing for a bit too, but I was just I was concerned about it. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, Doc, while you're on board, would you mind doing an update on the brucellosis or tuberculosis testing that was being finalized?
Yeah, what we'll do is if Dr. Szymanski's on, I will have her take over. She did prepare or kind of update a sheet that was presented to the board a few months ago, and I will let her jump in at this point.
Great.
Thanks, Dr. Zalewski. Dr. Szymanski, Animal Health Bureau. Just a quick recap of the two significant epidemiological investigations that we had in Montana beginning in 2018. The first was the detection of the steer, a steer at a South Dakota slaughter plant. The steer had originated from a livestock market in South Dakota. Traceback determined that animal had come out of an assembled group with 99 potential contributors, 17 of which were in Montana. USDA decided that we would go back and require a test on all herds of origin for contributors to that load. So Montana worked with our 17 producers here in the state to accomplish testing. That testing began October of 2018, and 15 of the herds were completed by January 11 of 2019. 2 of those herds were holdovers into fall of 19, as the board hopefully remembers, because one was initially attributed to Wyoming, and the other one had already turned cattle out for the year by the time we got a hold of them. So those 2 herds came back, tested in fall of 19. All of the testing in Montana associated with that June 2018 steer that was found in South Dakota was completed November 1st of 2019. In Montana, we completed 4,867 TB tests associated with that. We did have 44 caudal fold test suspects, 2 CCT suspects, so that's kind of the subsequent testing that we do. Only 2 of those animals, or those 2 animals, were taken to slaughter, where we found no evidence of tuberculosis. Previously mentioned, I believe, to the board, we had 25 people that worked on that investigation. The total of their hours and mileage on that investigation exceeded just over 2,000 hours and just shy of 48,000 miles traveled. The second significant investigation that the department worked on was the March 2019 detection of tuberculosis in a beef cow at a plant in Nebraska. Traceback on that cow found that she had come out of a South Dakota feedlot where she had spent approximately 110 days. Prior to going to that feedlot, she had sold through a Montana sale barn from a ranch of origin here in Montana. So based upon her brucellosis vaccination tag that was collected at slaughter and all of the movement documentation, we were able to trace that animal back to a Custer County herd. This was a slightly different investigation than the June 2018 steer because we had a direct trace back to the herd of origin. That Custer County herd was placed under quarantine and had two whole herd tests that were done April 2019 and May of 2019. The first test, we did pull 8 TB responders that were sent to the diagnostic lab. Samples were collected and an attempt to culture tuberculosis was made. We found no disease in those animals. And then on that second whole herd test in May, all of the animals were negative. That herd was released from quarantine at that time, but still required to complete an insurance test 6 to 12 months later. 6 months would have put us in the in the December range of 2019, based upon management of that herd. They had already run cows through the chute, and so USDA asked us to push that assurance test out an additional year. We know that our live animal tests for tuberculosis aren't perfect, and so we want to give as much time between the quarantine release test and that assurance test before we conduct it. So that herd will be tested this fall on that assurance test.
Questions?
Yeah, the only question I had, so they weren't, that reassurance test was not done during, or is that not a good time to test them?
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Taylor, I'm sorry, you cut out at you cut out. Can you repeat your question?
The reassurance test that should have been done either 6 months to a year after that April, May testing should have been done, like, if not in 6 months, it should have been done when they branded. But is that not a good time? Are the titers too high or something? Is that why they don't do it then?
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Taylor, so there's two different, I guess, reasons that we don't test cattle. So there's the option to test them around calving time, which is when the animal's immune system changes. And so we don't want to test them immediately around calving. That has to do with the performance of the test. And then branding obviously would be an opportunity to test cows based upon work that we did a few years ago associated with a trace out from South Dakota when we did some testing around branding. Because you have to run cows through the chute 2 times, it requires calves to be sorted off a second time. And we've really caused some headaches for producers with that second separation and trying to get them to mother back up. And so knowing that USDA wanted us to push it out further, and our history of not having good success with 2 separations of cows from calves, we decided to wait until this fall.
Okay, so then you'll come back to us and tell us when that's completed, please.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you for the.
And Ms. Taylor, if I may add as well, one of the challenges for us when we do that spring testing and why we really shy away from it, this is Marty Zalewski, state veterinarian, is the fact that there is no indemnity or any type or any method for us to reimburse those producers for those costs of mandatory testing, whether it's lost calves or animals. And so that's, another reason why we try to minimize at all costs those types of, that type of harm, unless the risk of disease in a particular herd is really high.
Well, they had something, well, I'm not going to go any further than that. I understand that, but I also understand when you live in areas where there's the possibility you're not really reassured until you at least kind of hear that it's been completed. Thanks.
Okay, any further? Okay, Port Supply.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I do have a question, particularly after our report from Kyle Chenoweth this morning. And I do notice the Livestock Loss Board budget is a little off. And after Kyle's report, is that something we're supposed to send a letter to all those board members to let them know that there's an issue?
Yes, and we've got Livestock Loss Board on further on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Port Supply.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, one thing that I will say that I noticed here is I was looking for that maintenance agreement in my book, and it's not in there. And because I think I assumed that Dan had provided that to Donna, he probably assumed I provided that to Donna. So we don't have that in the book. And so I don't know if you want to consider that or if you want to move that to another time, like another meeting, because it's not been there for the board to look at in full detail.
Okay, because we've had problems with it previously, let's just move it without objection. I'll move it to another.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you.
sorry
Livestock,
about that. Livestock crime investigator pay.
Yes, you do have that in your book. And so what I want to address this morning, one of the things the board had asked us to do and we talked about was taking a holistic look before snapshot of employee salaries and comparison to markets. We've done that. The good news is what we have found is that the legislative increases have largely kept us, after that big adjustment we did that we had to fight through for a couple of years, that the legislature giving their 50% or 50-cent increases each time has kind of kept us on par with market, even with the move to 2018, which is good news, because that doesn't mean we have a big heavy lift like we did several years ago. But one of the things we noticed as we were going through that project, and I wanted to bring back to the board's attention before snapshot occurs in mid-July, is some issues we feel like we see with livestock crime investigator pay. One of the things that certainly came out when we looked at the livestock crime investigator position description several months ago, and when several of those guys came to our meeting and they've expressed it to me and to the board, concern about the market adjustments, moving the market supervisor positions to a higher rate, higher level of pay, and some things that might be incentivizing within the brands division of how personnel may behave based on what those salaries are. So what you have before you, and would have to be executed before snapshot if we wanted it to be in our budget, would be an increase that would raise our livestock crime investigators. There's 14 of them that are below market supervisors, so it would raise them to the same rate of pay that we're paying our market supervisors. Some positives that we see in that is that, one, when we have opened positions for livestock crime investigators, anecdotally, as I've had to do some of them with the absence of a brand administrator, is we get questions from people who serve in local law enforcement or even in other categories of state law enforcement whose interest wanes once they find out what the pay is. So a raise in this category would make us a little more competitive for talent, particularly given that most other law enforcement in the state is in a labor organization under a CBA, and so they do have higher salaries than our folks have had. We also think it's a positive from an incentivization within the brands division. Like right now, what we want to do is have people who are good at being a market supervisor be able to remain in that position, but people who want to go into law enforcement go into law enforcement, and the pay can sort of incentivize people to go on different tracks. All totaled, you'll see that to execute that for our livestock crime investigators, it'd be an increase in our personal services line with benefits included of $37,279. In working with Brian, they're projecting the per capita fee carry forward for next year to be at around $140,000. That's authority that's allowed to be carried forward from one budget year to the next. And that's how we would propose covering that. And then, of course, it would be when it was snapshotted at that rate, it would be in our base budget moving forward to the legislature. So I wanted to give the board the opportunity to take a look at that and see if that's an adjustment that they would like to make. And that's the only salary adjustment we're bringing to you before snapshot.
Okay, so let me just, for process purposes here before we get into questions. So we would have, because this is brand new, we would have a ability to put it in a June meeting, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay, so it's not something we have to do today, but we'd have to act before the end of June. Okay, questions for Mike. And when does our new brand administrator come in?
Yes, that's I can go ahead and cover that June 1st.
Okay, so
June 1st he'll be on board.
So if we postpone that discussion until then, he would have an oar in the water, right?
Correct.
Okay. Questions for Mike?
Mr. Chairman.
Everybody understand the carry forward?
Can I ask, John, can I ask a question? Are there only 14, are all the investigators affected? There are only 14 of them, right?
No, there are several that would not be affected because for whatever reason, their rate of pay is actually higher than the other 14. And some of that has to do with several of them that have been with the department a longer period of time. And I think, there were some other budget adjustments and things that were made by past boards that those people got the benefit of, but new employees didn't when they come in at the base rate that we were hiring at that time. So it is not all investigators would be getting a raise. There would only be 14 of them that would be getting a raise.
How many investigators do we have? 16?
I think that's correct. 16 districts.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Nina. Mike, so if I'm following things correctly here, that means this 37,000 would be added to the 954,000 personal services that we have right now for brands?
No.
It would actually be on next fiscal year, so I don't know what if our number, I think, has an increase in the next fiscal year already built into it for the January pay raise, and that was given by the legislature and some other factors. So it's not affecting this fiscal year.
Okay, I was looking at the wrong figure there. Okay, thank you.
If you enacted it today, when it would become effective?
It would go into the next pay period, or actually we'd probably do it in the last pay period of the fiscal year, which sometimes gets split over fiscal years, but we would do it at essentially, and Evan might speak to what the payroll calendar is, but I would assume we'd be doing it at the last possible time we could do it, and it still be active on July 14th when the snapshot takes place. Because it does have to be in the payroll system the day they do the snapshot.
So we'd still be okay if we did it at the June meeting?
I believe so, unless Evan disagrees with me on the payroll calendar.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Mike, I'm looking at an email from our budget office, and she's saying that the snapshot is July 14th, so it does have to be in there. I would say on the 1st. I got
so July 1st.
Has to be in July 1st?
I'm gonna look at my calendar here. Snapshot is
I know snapshot is July 14th. It just has to be in pay. It has to be in for a complete payroll cycle. So that's either the last week of June or on July 1st that it would have to be in.
I don't have a payroll schedule right in front of me, so it would take me a minute to figure out what day it would have to be in, but it would be probably the 22nd or 3rd. June
22nd or 23rd of June?
June 27th.
Oh, 7th. Okay.
4th.
Okay. So if there was a board meeting on the 3rd or 4th week, it would make it.
Seems so.
Okay. What do you want to do, board? You want to postpone it until the new director comes in?
That's what I think we should do.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll postpone this one. So this should go high on the list for the next board meeting, subject to our approval then. All right. Next one.
Okay, update and planning on the vacant recently filled position. So recently filled, as you know, is the division administrator. So Ethan Wilfore starts on June 1st. Thanks to us being in phase 2 starting June 1st, he'll be able to report here to the office on that day. And we're preparing for his arrival, and I've been having conversations with him and putting him in touch with his direct reports so that if there's questions he wants to ask before he gets here, he has the ability to do that. On the market inspector positions, those positions are open and we're receiving candidates for those. In fact, actually, I received a comment from Ty that he has, they've completed the screening for those, and hopefully we'll be interviewing soon to get all the vacancies in the markets for market inspectors filled. The brands compliance position, the interviews are going to be taking place here in the next week. We did get a good applicant pool for that, so hopefully we will be in a position to hire that within the next 2 weeks or so after interviews are complete. The Glasgow district has been open, and I believe it closes on May 27th. So we'll see what the applicant pool there is. We left that a little open longer than we anticipated because we were having difficulty getting applicants for that position. And then last but not least is the Western Region Supervisor position, the position that Ernie McCaffrey previously held. And so that position is closed. We have candidates. The screening is happening on that right now, and I believe the interviews for that will begin within the next week as well. So that's where we are on the brands vacancies.
Let me ask you this. Can the new director participate, because that's significant numbers relative to new hires taking place moments before he comes on board?
Well, I think the intent was for him to participate in the market inspector interviews because that would give him a chance to meet staff. I think for the others, there's not a reason that we can't, hold back on those. But again, like the brand compliance position is not a direct report to the administrator. And I guess the Western Region Supervisor is a direct report to him. The Glasgow district is not a direct report, but it'll be participating in that would be a good opportunity to get ingrained with the department. So, other than, I don't know, the brands compliance position is probably not a big deal, but I think the other three would probably be good to have his participation in. Just if for nothing else, his learning and meeting of people within the division.
Yeah, it seems to me that that would be appropriate if it could be accomplished, is that he participate as much as he can and is available to do. Questions for Mike on any of that? Okay, legal counsel update we've had. Tuberculosis we've had because I put it in ahead of right after the recess part. Livestock Loss Board.
Love to you. Love to have together.
Good morning, everybody. George Edwards, Livestock Loss Board. I
Good
really
morning, George. Fire away.
don't really have anything more to add than the report that I turned in, other than we've added 7 head of cattle since the sheet you received from a week ago. And 1 head in Beaverhead County, 4 head in Carbon, and 2 head of cattle in Madison County, all killed by wolves. As far as the budget goes, my board is aware of where their budget stands already. And the categories that we're low, or I'm short in, are personal services. And the 2% vacancy savings is applied to us, and I am the only employee, so we have nowhere to absorb that. But we are showing a positive for the end of the year.
Okay. And so you probably should have your board communicate with Brian, or you do it and copy your board or whatever, George.
They're aware.
I know they're aware, but they need to respond like you have.
Okay.
Any questions for George? Okay, thank you, George. A wildlife service update.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is John Steiber. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I don't have much to add today, other than kind of update the board a little bit about the grizzly bear work. We've had over 50 investigations on livestock depredations already this year, and they started with 3 investigations in March. So we've got almost 50 now, just since the beginning of April, going at a record pace. So wolf issues are also going on, particularly in your area, Mr. Chairman. We've got a number of wolf issues going on in Madison County. But of note, of course, is that no livestock has even gone to summer range yet down in the state. So we expect an uptick in a lot of that damage to come once June gets rolling. But that's all that I had for the board, but I can't answer any questions the board might have.
Hey, John, thank you for the report on the helicopter. Questions for John?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Brett had a number of questions this morning, and I don't remember them all. Brett, are you there?
I think his questions were future information on the helicopter.
I don't know if he might not be there.
Did we lose Brett?
I'm here. You got to allow me to think for a second. So I was curious about if we can acquire a helicopter through the same way we did before. I was curious on the old helicopter. I don't know that we totally have an understanding of the hours that these airframes are good for, because we have one helicopter that has the most hours on it that's getting a engine overhaul that should make it work so long as the airframe can handle it for another 7 or 8 years before it needs another engine overhaul. I'm just at a bit of a loss as to exactly the lifetime expected use and the not that I disbelieve what John's saying, but I'd like to see some other factual information showing these types of helicopters and how long they're in use in different parts of the country and world. There's got to be plenty of these other helicopters out there.
Yes, this is John. Yeah, and there are. It's the one that I was presenting to the board was just something that had come up that was a very good deal on a helicopter. It's getting much more difficult to get LESO helicopters because police departments and so on are in line for a lot of those LESO helicopters, the ones that are loaned to law enforcement agencies. So it's getting very, very difficult to get those helicopters. And also, of course, that helicopter will have to go back to the LESO program when we're through with it. We can't sell that helicopter or use any parts off of it or anything like that. So that will be basically turned back to the LESO office when we're finished with that helicopter. You know, I'm not a helicopter expert by any means, but everything that I've seen is that anything over 15,000 hours on an airframe is starting to get to be a lot of hours on an airframe. That's the only part that's not, basically the only part that's not timed, as far as you can't replace the airframe on a helicopter. Everything else is timed. So, you know, like the rotor blades, the engines, the hot sections, even the tail boom, everything else is timed on it. But just like a truck that you drive on your ranch, you know, if you could replace the engine and everything, but at some point that frame's going to start wearing out, and you're going to have a lot of issues with just basic truck itself. So it's similar to the helicopter. You just see a lot of stress on the, you know, the rivets and the frame and everything. So, and you know, I had a question before about the time, the flight time or the airframe times on them, and that was the explanation that I gave for 6-2 Charlie. It was a military hospital for the first 30, however many years of its life, and the military just doesn't fly those much, you know, 150 hours a year or so. So that's why 95 Tango, even though it's a 1980 model, it has a little bit more flight hours than the other one. The bottom line is that 95 Tango, the Hughes, the parts are still available for it at a decent cost. The parts for 6-2 Charlie, the issue with that is that there's no new parts being made for those OH-58s. So that's the issue with 6-2 Charlie, is we just can't find parts. You know, a good example is the main rotor blades. You know, the last time we bought those, it was 180,000. So that's gone up almost triple in just a little over 10 years.
Okay, so the action we took, John, was to put a letter request in pursuant to your recommendation, and 150 per year each year of the biennium.
Okay.
And then try to figure out at a later date what the end result's going to be.
Yes, sir. And what we could do is if a helicopter comes up, you know, we could send a pilot down to look at it, and then if it's not what the board wants, then we have the right of refusal on that helicopter. And we've done that for some of the helicopters that USDA got. You know, if it has too many airframe hours or it's not what we want, we just refuse it and we stay on the list. And the next one that comes up, we take another look at it and get with the board and see if the board is interested. And if you all are interested, then we could do that. So it's not tying us to having to get a specific helicopter.
Okay, any other questions for John?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. John Stiber, how long will this price that you quoted us of about 290,000 stay in effect?
What did he say? I think through, they're going to start releasing those helicopters. What did he say? I'm looking through my notes here. I think they were going to start releasing those helicopters in 2021. Is that?
That's what you said in your document.
Okay, yeah. So I think they have 75 helicopters that will start being made available in 2021. So that's hard to say right now, but you know, I would say that getting in line now is probably a good idea, because as more agencies get in line and those helicopters coming up, some of those 75 helicopters may not even be flyers. I don't know the condition of all of them, but those are how many that Army is going to dispose of.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is John Youngberg with Farm Bureau. I have a question of John. I read a press release yesterday about a lawsuit with Wild Horse Guardians, a settlement on predator control, it looks to me like it will limit what some predator control in the western states. Could I ask John to comment on that, please?
Yes, John. So the settlement has been filed by the Department of Justice. The court has not approved it yet. There was some early release of that information, but the court has not approved the settlement yet. So the litigation is ongoing. And until the court has made a decision on it, I can't comment on the settlement. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay. And
Well, how do we find out what the content of the settlement is?
It's a public document, so it's out there. I think it's even, I know it's on some websites. I think it was even a link in the Billings Gazette article that was in the paper today and so on. So I expect that there'll be a decision by the court very soon. And once that decision is, I can make comments.
My rough reading of this, Mr. Chairman, is that it could severely limit Wildlife Service's ability to control predators.
Yikes. Then I suspect we have, has anybody in our department looked at it? Mike?
No, sir, I haven't looked at it other than what I've seen in the press.
Well, then I suspect it's news to me, and so I suspect the prudent thing to do for us to look at it as soon as we can and put it on the agenda for June. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
John Stiber, you also had a program where you received funds and you reported to us in January or February about grizzly bear management. And I'm wondering if you could tell us what's happened with those funds and what's been done, if anything, at this stage in the game.
Yes, sure can. As of Monday, the 26th, next week, Monday, we'll have 2 new specialists on board, one on the Rocky Mountain front and one in Madison County. They'll be helping us specifically with grizzly bear work. That was funds from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then also we'll have in your area specifically, Mr. Chairman, we'll have a new range rider that'll be starting on May 26th as well. And that person has ridden those allotments in the Gravelies for 12 or 15 years. So he's well versed with the livestock producers that take their cattle up to the Gravelies and so on. He's well versed with the allotments, and he'll be able to hit the ground running rather quickly up there. So we hope to have both those people will be in place before the livestock go to summer range in the Gravelies. And also the new grizzly bear specialist on the front will be starting work on Tuesday as well. We've got a little bit of training to do next week, but then they'll be available to start assisting our folks. We also have a range rider starting up in Kootenai National Forest on those allotments up there, and that's the position that we've had for the last 2 years. This will be the 3rd summer that that person will be up there.
And what will their task be?
It'll of course it varies. The range riders will be out there, looking for predator sign, identifying predator sign, communicating with the Forest Service, range con, and the permittees about where there's more predator sign and so on. They'll also be looking for dead livestock, of course. As you know, there was a lot of livestock that came up missing last year in the Gravelies. Hopefully we'll have extra riders up there that will be able to help find dead livestock and do necropsies on those to see if they were killed by what they were killed by or what they died from. And then the grizzly bear specialists will be doing everything that our other specialists do as far as grizzly bear work. So they'll be up there doing necropsies. They'll also be doing some riding. And part of the range rider's responsibilities too are to look for injured or sick livestock and reporting to the permittees about livestock that might be separated or injured or sick or whatever that might make them even more susceptible to predation. So basically in the Graveleys, we'll have 2 extra people riding this summer.
Okay, any further questions for John? Okay, John, thank you very much. Milk Control Board update, Mike?
Yes, I'll kick this off and then I'll see what pieces Chad Lee wants to add. I see that he's on the line. So as most of you have been following, and we've talked about a few times in previous board meetings, Dean Foods, which run the medical plants in Montana, was in bankruptcy and looking to finally got a deal to sell their assets to Dairy Farmers of America, DFA. All of that got finalized here in the last couple of months and their assets transferred to DFA. What happened is in April, when their assets transferred to Dairy Farmers of America, then any creditors that they have and also any accounts receivable they have were put into a settlement fund being handled as part of the overall bankruptcy. So there were some bills by Dean Foods, which now does not exist as an entity, that were left unpaid to producers, haulers, to the Milk Control Board for their assessments, and also to the Department of Livestock for our milk inspection fees, because those are taken as deductions from those payments that go out to producers and haulers, best I understand it. And so you can't take the deductions because the bills are not being paid. At present, and this is where I'll let Chad speak to this. I know Chad has had direct contact in writing with those people who are managing the Dean Foods Settlement Fund to basically get us in line for the state pieces, the milk assessment fees for Milk Control Board and the milk inspection fees for our Milk and Egg Bureau, and also making sure that they are aware that producers and haulers were not paid their full payments for the month of April. And as best I understand it, those individual producers will also have to go to the settlement fund and make their claim to hopefully be able to get that month's revenues paid for the milk that was delivered to the plant. I'll stop there and see what Chad wants to add or correct for the record.
Chad?
Okay. Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the amounts that the Dean Foods estate owes that pertain to the plants themselves total $40,653.36, with only around $1,200 of that being estimated, the rest of it being known, and that's for the plants distributor assessments to the Milk Control Bureau and Milk and Egg Bureau for March of 2020 and April of 2020, and $28,241 owed to the pool settlement fund, which is basically sort of like a trust account managed by the Milk Control Bureau that is related to the payment of producers. And then in terms of producer assessments that are owed by the Dean Foods estate to the Department of Livestock, that's another $15,660.88 pertaining to April. The administrative rules that we have specify that it's the pool handlers that remit such fees and assessments to the department. So even, and that they withhold this from payment to the producers. So I guess it's our opinion that it is Dean Foods who owes this. And of course, Dean Foods also still owes the producers. So the total amount owed is $66,314.24, with some of that being a small amount being estimated. Most of it is due on May 25th, so perhaps it could still be paid on time. But based off of the correspondence with the Dean Foods estate, it appears that this will get drug out, although looking at bankruptcy documents, their cash schedule is going to July 31st. So hopefully this does get wound up. I guess our position is that we think these are pre or post petition claims, so claims that should be paid with some priority to pre-petition claims. But you know, more legal research is required here, and we may have to do some filing. The producers, what they're still owed, producers received advance payments. So for April 2020 sales to Dean Foods, producers were owed a minimum payment of essentially 1.6 million. They received advance payments of about 562,000. So that still leaves them being owed about 1,060,000. From that, though, they would have deductions for hauling and for various assignments, which would include assignments for the federal checkoff, assignments for the milk control inspection, the milk inspection assessment, and some other assignments related to the Montana Milk Producers Association and some financing assignments that individual producers have authorized.
Okay, the only question I have for both of you is the proper written correspondence been made relative to the debt owed?
We have made correspondence. I guess we are still, you know, researching, determining how we made the proper correspondence. So we're working on that.
Does the Department or Board of Livestock have to take any action in order to have a letter written for the amount of debt owed, or would it be helpful?
Mike, what do you think on that?
I don't see any reason why it would harm. Let's put it that way. I mean, as a matter of course, I think as staff, we're always going to try to pursue whatever money is owed to us through whatever methods we have to try and collect it.
Okay, so that's on your agenda. We need not worry about it. Any questions about the report? Okay, I understand no action is necessary.
Don, this is Ed.
Yeah.
I have I found out that national advertisement has been paid. Montana milk producers have been paid for the month from Dean Foods. There is no more existing Dean Foods. It's all handled by the banks that borrow them the money, and that's the people who have to make the payments to us. And accounts receivable are up to 60 days from the last day of April. So it could be tomorrow, it could be in 60 days. But I do believe that we will get paid.
Okay, anything else on that item?
From the research that we've done, accounts receivable, they borrowed $800 million from that bank to keep going while the bankruptcy was on, to pay us, pay producers and pay some of their bills they had to keep going. But their accounts receivable, what we know, should be close to $1 billion. So they should be able to pay everybody. But if you make a phone call to anybody now except 2 people, they tell you, we're not working for Dean's anymore, we're working for DFA.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
About it.
Thank you, Ed. Any other comments or questions about the Milk Control Board report? Okay, I had asked that the report in the consent agenda be removed to a later time, and I don't know who's on the call at this point, but I haven't forgotten it. The first part of it, I think we already covered with Dr. Judah relative to the CWD meeting that took place under bullet number 1 that Dr. Shemansky attended. but I wanted to, and there was comments already made during the meeting about the rabbit disease. So that leaves carcass disposal report. And what I wanted to do there is because we have the issue over here, and as a result of CWD and whatnot, the Board of Health over here has issued decisions concerning carcass disposal and had a hearing or two. And when we brought this up previously, I think Dr. Szymanski referred us to the DEQ, and anyway, eventually they got some response there. Do we have anything that needs to be forwarded to the to George Edwards' organization concerning carcass disposal that was learned at this meeting that they need to know about?
Mr. Chair, this is Tanya Szymanski, Animal Health Bureau. I don't believe so, Mr. Scully. The kind of the heart of this meeting was recognizing the lack of slaughter capacity that is existing, and some discussion in the Midwest about depopulation of market weight animals that didn't have access to slaughter channels. If we started to see some of that back up in Montana, how are we going to handle those depopulation events and subsequent disposal of those carcasses? So I don't know that anything would be of benefit to pass on to George Edwards Group.
Okay, great. The Brucellosis quarantine of Gallatin County, I think you covered that. Are there any questions? There were some questions last meeting about the status of the brucellosis testing. Maybe you should just cover that while you're at it.
Sure. So this bullet point, Mr. Chair, members of the board, pertain to an animal that was tested at the market for change of ownership testing, required change of ownership testing, that came back with non-negative results. That animal was held back, was not sold, and based upon the desire of the owner to try and move through this as rapidly as possible, that animal ended up being diagnostic purchase, taken to the diagnostic lab, euthanized, and tissues collected on it. As you can see, the results of that were no growth, so that herd has subsequently been released from quarantine. So we're just down to 2 affected herds, the 2010 Gallatin County herd that we've had obviously for 10 years, and then the 2019 Madison County herd that was detected last fall.
Okay, any questions from anybody?
Mr. Chairman, this is
Yes.
Nina. Why is the herd from Gallatin County that started in 2010, have they never cleared? Why are they still being tested? Or are they still positive, or what's going on there?
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Bacchus, Tanya Szymanski, Animal Health Bureau. That's correct. This is a large herd, and we continue to find non-negatives every year on their annual herd test. And so they have not been able to meet the requirements to be released from quarantine.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions on that? Okay, are there any comments from the public on non-agenda items? I don't know whether John's still on. I don't know who's on at this point.
This is Sue. I'm on.
No, but I mean from the public. I don't know who's on from the public. Okay,
Mr. Chair, this is Mike. I can see that John Youngberg and Rachel Cohn are on from Farm Bureau, and we have someone on from Farmers Union. I'm assuming that may be Justin Locke. And I think everybody else I'm seeing on the line is someone who is participating in the meeting. So unless I've missed someone, those would be your folks who potentially might have public comment.
Okay, I'll ask again, any comments on non-agenda items? Okay, well, thank you all for attending, and Dan, thanks for all your efforts in putting this together in the process. We have to look towards a next meeting in June, which I assume may be one in person, depending on how things progress. Is there anyone that has an issue during the third or fourth week of June?
I do, but I don't know what it is yet. It's the local 4-H fair for my kids. Probably earlier in the week rather than later, as I don't know what's going to happen with that fair.
Which week, Brett?
You know, you think I'd know that. I think it's the week of the 21st, but I don't even know that. It's always
that's
right
right
there.
That's all right.
But if we have the meeting earlier in the week on a Monday or Tuesday, I should be okay either week.
Does anybody else have any problems in the third or fourth week of June?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. The only day I can't do it on is the 16th. That week. I could do it after or before that week.
Okay, the 16th would be out then.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if we wait until the week of the 21st, that gives Ethan more time to pull up, get acquainted with what he's doing.
Yes, I agree with that. Plus, it gives the finance people time. So with that in mind, why don't we, Mike? Why don't you take a look at those dates? And Brett's better, and just verify that relative to his 4-H situation, and then give us a couple dates to shoot at, and we'll go from there. I'm not contemplating, at this time at least, I'm not contemplating any kind of finance committee or anything on the day before. But let me ask you this, if we're still doing it electronically like we are now with Zoom, do you like the half a day one day and the half a day the next, or do you want to grind it out in one day?
I think if it's the Zoom, do the half one day, half the next.
This is Sue. I agree. It was much better.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I like the 2 half days are much better, but I hope it's in person, which the 2 half days would be better anyway.
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina, and I agree the 2 half days are very nice, but I'm going to push really hard to encourage everyone to have a face-to-face meeting.
Okay, well, the 2 cookie meeting is a fine idea. Okay, so let's leave it to Mike. Mike, that's okay. We'll leave it to you to schedule the next meeting in light of Brett's and Lila's conflicts and anything else that pops up on anyone else in the meantime. Make sure you bring that to Mike. Is there anything else? I understand there's still some items not acted upon, but we can schedule those for the next meeting or not, depending on what the staff brings forward. So,
John,
is there any?
I have one question before we go.
Fire away.
So this morning when we got started, there was a requested update on that indemnity fund, and I wasn't sure. I mean, I don't have an axe to grind either way, but I read through it, and that seems something you would be interested in. I wasn't sure if we were moving too fast or what. Do you want to comment to that?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I think the indemnity fund issue, moving it up is, in terms of value across the board, we should be doing some things to make sure that people are getting paid the right amount in that process. But I am, so generally speaking, because I think we brought that up before, that we're across the board, the producers who have damage are getting paid less. But I think the issue is going to be in the end, you know, how much per capita fund where. But other than that, I don't have any real issue unless there's a piece of it, Brett, that you think I should respond to.
I don't know that I do. It just, I know we were kind of buzzing through it this morning, and I was kind of sitting back waiting for you or somebody else to comment on it, and then we moved on. And I just wasn't sure if you know, this seemed like something you'd been talking about in the past. I wasn't sure if we needed to bring this back up before we left. That's my point.
Well, I think I left it the way I was leaving it as available for the next meeting. To make sure we had clarity around the indemnity fund as to who we're paying for what. I think we were missing some data. So
what are you saying then, that indemnity fund deal that should be brought up at the next meeting?
Well, I'm saying anything that we haven't dealt with, the lawyer issue that we don't have the data on, and anything else is open to be brought forward to the next meeting.
I'm good. I just my only point was that was something I remembered you talking about in the past, and so I wanted to see if we just buzzed by it a little too quickly. That's all my point was. So,
Mike, any comments?
No, not for me.
So as far as I'm concerned, anything that's on the, that we went over that we didn't act on is available for our next meeting. So,
okay.
And as a legislative proposal, though there's notice to be given relative to the state concerning our board's legislative activity, obviously indemnity funds can be brought forward as a piece of legislation by others as well. So, but I am generally believe that the indemnity, to your point, ought to be appropriate across the board. And if we remember, we did talk about Wyoming's and Idaho's and how come they're what they are relative to, and then we found out Georgia's their market. So I'm okay with letting it go to the next meeting.
Okay.
Could we have the information in the packet though, kind of what the feds pay, like on TV? I know that's kind of how this all came out, was finding out that the feds indemnify, like at least on the herd that I knew, the bull that they had, they held their ground till they got paid what they paid for that bull at a sale. So I think having the information in front of us would be worth having so we can see it, not just talk about it. I appreciate that.
And I think that's why we postponed it.
Right.
Okay, is there anything else that anybody like to bring up? Okay, then I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, Mike, and all the staff for. And Brian, your work was great on that lab.
Thank you.